One quiet Monday morning at the cafe, a stranger sat across from me and said, "You don't recognize me, do you?" I barely looked up. Then he opened a file and began laying out details the day my son went missing the park, the exact time, facts that hadn't crossed anyone's lips in 35 years. Something seized in my chest. "Who are you?" I managed. His eyes didn't waver. "I am your son." Every part of me reached for it. I had to believe it was real. It felt like something pulled straight from a prayer until he spoke one final sentence, and the whole thing shattered. "Welcome back to Calm Family Revenge, a place where real family stories get told with honesty and heart. If these stories stay with you long after they end, I'd be glad if you hit the like button and subscribed so you never miss one." Before we begin, tell me, is it morning where you are, afternoon? Or are you settled in late at night? I find that the hour you choose to listen to a story like this says something about you. This story draws on real events but includes dramatized elements for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to specific individuals is coincidental. It's the truth underneath the story that matters most. The Monday morning crowd at Cafe Meridian ran its usual course. Students folded over laptops, office workers grabbing their caffeine before the week swallowed them whole. I was settled at my corner table, the one with the wobbly leg that nobody else wanted, 3 cold case files fanned out in front of me, the way I'd arranged them every Monday for the last 8 years. Old habits don't die easy when you've logged 35 years as a private investigator. Retirement hadn't changed the ritual. Cold cases nobody hired me to crack anymore, that was the work now. It kept the mind from going soft, kept it from circling back to everything I'd never been able to fix. I was halfway through my second cup of dark roast when a man dropped into the seat across from me without so much as a glance for permission. Late 30s, I figured. He had on a dark navy peacoat that looked expensive but wrinkled like he'd slept in it. Dark hair thinning near the temples. Clean-shaven but carrying the kind of exhaustion that parks itself behind a person's eyes and refuses to budge no matter how many hours they sleep. I'd put that look on people before. Parents, spouses, the ones who came to me already knowing the answer but needing someone else to confirm it. "You don't recognize me, do you?" he said. I glanced up from the Hernandez file, a 2000 missing person case that had gone cold before I walked away from the job. The question knocked me sideways. People from the old days called first. Should I? I kept my tone flat. Cop flat. A reflex that never fully left. He didn't answer straight away. Instead, he reached into a canvas shoulder bag and drew out an accordion folder, the kind lawyers use. His hands had a faint tremor as he laid it on the table between us, careful to clear my coffee cup. "My name is Derek Harlow," he said, "and 35 years ago, you and Diane Calloway filed a missing person report for your 3-year-old son. January 18th, 1986, Forsyth Park, 4:15 in the afternoon." The world tilted. Nobody had spoken those particulars aloud to me in decades. That date was scorched into me, permanent as bone, but hearing it fall from a stranger's mouth felt like a fist closing around my heart. "Shudung." "Who the hell are you?" I said. The words came out rougher than I'd meant them to. "I'm your son." Neither of us moved for a long moment. Around us, the espresso machine hissed, and somewhere behind me, someone laughed too loud at something I didn't catch. I sat there studying this man. Derek, he'd called himself, trying to hold what he was saying up against 35 years of grief that had worked its way into me the way cold works into old joints. "That's not possible," I said at last. "My son has been gone 35 years. Son, no." Derek opened the folder with the kind of care you'd give evidence at a crime scene. "I was taken, sold to a Romanian trafficking ring. I spent 15 years in Bucharest before an American couple adopted me in 1997. They were living in Charlotte. They named me Derek Harlow. I've been in North Carolina ever since. He pushed a photograph across the table. It was old. Colors faded the way Polaroids go, edges worn soft from years of handling. A boy around 3 years old on a front stoop, a golden retriever beside him with its tongue lolling out. The kid was laughing. I knew that photograph. I'd taken it myself, summer of 1985, outside our old place on Habersham Street. My hands went cold. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. "It was in the file the adoption agency gave me when I turned 18, along with this." He slid across a photocopy of an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local couple's son vanishes from Forsyth Park." Diane's face looked up at me from the grainy print, her eyes hollowed out by a grief that eventually took her 6 years later. And this. Derek extended his left hand palm up and drew back his sleeve. Just below the wrist, a jagged white scar roughly 2 inches long. "You remember this?" I did. God help me, I did. He'd been 18 months old trying to scale the kitchen counter to get at the cookie jar. Lost his grip and came down on a broken coffee mug. 10 stitches at Memorial Health University Medical Center. Diane had wept harder than he did. "Could be anyone's scar," I said. But the edge had left my voice. I was reaching for something to hold on to, and we both knew it. "To your right side of the left wrist," Derek said quietly. "Shaped like a lightning bolt. Your wife used to joke it made me look like a tiny Harry Potter before Harry Potter even existed." That detail had never appeared in a police report. Never showed up in a single news article. Diane had said it exactly once on the phone with her sister, maybe a month before the world fell apart. I remembered because I'd been standing in the kitchen doorway watching her try to turn our son's scar into a story he'd carry with pride one day. A story about being brave. "I need you to understand something." Derek leaned forward. His eyes were hazel, the same shade as Diane's. How had I not caught that the moment he sat down? So I spent 25 years not knowing who I was. The couple who adopted me were decent people, but they had no knowledge of my real history. All the agency had given them was the story that I was a Romanian orphan, that my parents were dead, that I needed a home. I believed that until I was 33 years old. Last year I did one of those ancestry DNA tests, the kind everyone does now for fun. I'd never taken one myself. Too many cases had come across my desk where genetic surprises tore families down to the foundation. The results flagged a match, Derek said. A close family match. Russell Calloway, 62 years old, Savannah, former private investigator. I spent 6 months looking into your life before I could bring myself to walk through that door. I know what happened in '89. I know our mother died in '95. I know you've never stopped searching for me. I stopped a long time ago. I said, though it was only half true. You never actually stop. You just learn to build your life around the absence. I know about Buddy too, Derek said softly. I went still. What? The golden retriever. He slept under the stairs, didn't he? You got him in '85, and he made it to '92. Mom wrote about him in her journal. The adoption agency passed along some of her belongings when I turned 18, things the traffickers had left behind. I suppose they figured a journal wasn't worth anything. My throat locked. Diane's journal. I had long assumed it was gone, swallowed up with everything else. The thought of her words surviving, passing through traffickers' hands, through bureaucrats, through strangers, before finally reaching this man claiming to be my son. It was too much. I need proof, I said, steadying myself. More than a scar and a photograph and facts you could have turned up with research. I need a DNA test, independent lab, clean chain of custody. I won't. I understand. Derek reached into his coat and placed a business card on the table. I already reached out to Coastal DNA Lab downtown. They handle paternity testing. We can go today right now if you're ready. I looked at the card, looked at him, at the scar below his wrist and the worn-down hope in his eyes, at the photograph my son, my dog Diane's shadow stretching across the stoop. Yeah, I said finally. All right, let's go. Derek gave a small nod, something like relief moving through him, but then his face shifted, drew inward. He reached toward my hand across the table, stopped himself, pulled back. There's something else you need to know, he said. Something about my grandfather's estate. A trust fund worth. He stopped, swallowed, started over. We need to talk about the money, Russell, because that's part of why I came here. The hope I'd been fighting to keep at arm's length turned hard and cold in my chest. Of course. There it was. 35 years, and I was still the same man who wanted to believe people were something more than what they usually turned out to be. How much, I asked. The $140 million, Derek said. And I can't get to it without you. Eddie Brannigan had been my partner for 12 years before I put in my papers. In all that time, I'd never seen him look quite this uneasy. We sat in Eddie's Tahoe, outside Coastal DNA Lab engine, idling, neither of us making a move to go inside. The dashboard clock read 2:13 p.m. We were early. You sure about this? Eddie asked, not for the first time since he'd swung by to pick me up that morning. I watched the building's glass front figures in white coats drifting behind the windows like shapes in fog. No. But I have to know, Eddie grunted. He'd been up half the night pulling every database he still had clearance on, building out a profile on Derek Harlow. What he'd found hadn't done much to slow my pulse. "I'm guys clean on paper," Eddie said, picking up where we'd left off over breakfast. No record. Address checks out, penthouse in Charlotte. Rents $4,500 a month. He's got an LLC registered in Delaware. Something called Harlow Capital Management. But here's the thing, Russ. The financials don't hold up. The company shows almost no activity. No significant clients that I can find. So where's the money for that penthouse coming from? Maybe he's good at what he does. I said, though I didn't buy it. Or maybe he's got other income streams. Eddie tapped the steering wheel. I'm just saying, guy walks in claiming to be your long-lost son the same week he needs access to a $140 million trust fund. That's one hell of a coincidence. Yeah, I said quietly. It is. But then I thought about the scar on his wrist, about Diane's journal, which I'd written off as lost forever, about how he'd known Buddy slept under the stairs, a detail so small, so irrelevant to anyone outside our family, it seemed impossible to manufacture. Let's just see what the lab says, I told Eddie, and finally pushed open the car door. Coastal DNA Lab's lobby smelled like antiseptic and new carpet. Dr. Petra Dunning met us at the reception desk, a woman in her early 40s with dark hair pulled back tight, and the kind of brisk handshake that told you she had no patience for pleasantries. Mr. Calloway, she said, thank you for choosing our expedited service. Your results are ready. She glanced past me. Is this your legal representative? P.I. Eddie said before I could get a word in. I'm here as a witness. She gave a single nod and walked us down a corridor to a small conference room with a window looking out over the parking lot. Derek was already inside, seated at the far end of the table with his hands folded in front of him, like a man waiting to hear whether he'd gotten the job. He looked up when we came in, and I caught the same bone-deep exhaustion I'd seen at the cafe the day before. Or maybe I was reading into it. I hadn't slept much myself. Oh, gentlemen, Dr. Dunning said, opening her folder and placing 2 printed reports on the table. I'll keep this straightforward. We ran a standard paternity test using buccal swab samples collected yesterday at 1700 hours processed under full chain of custody protocol. She slid one of the reports in front of me. I didn't look at it. I was watching Derek, who sat perfectly still except for the faint tremor along his jaw. The genetic markers show a match probability of 99.97%. Dr. Dunning went on. In layman's terms, Mr. Calloway, the test confirms with near absolute certainty that you and Mr. Harlow share a biological parent-child relationship. The room tilted. I heard Eddie curse softly. Heard Dr. Dunning say something about statistical thresholds, how anything above 99% was considered conclusive, but I couldn't pull my eyes from the number on the page. 99.97%. My son. Not a ghost I'd spent 35 years hunting. Not a memory that had hardened into something untouchable. He was real. He was sitting 10 feet away from me, and he had Diane's eyes. And I had spent more than half my life convinced he was dead. Now, Russell. Derek's voice broke. I didn't know if it would really. He got to his feet, and I got to mine, and somehow the distance between us closed, and he was crying, and I was crying, and I couldn't recall the last time I'd held someone who mattered. His shoulders shook under my hands. He smelled like hotel soap and coffee. He was too thin, and I'm sorry, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what I was apologizing for. For doubting him. For not finding him. For 35 years of absence that grief alone couldn't account for. I looked for you. I told him the words coming before I could rein them in. Every day for 6 years. We put up flyers, brought in investigators, ran down every lead, no matter how far-fetched. Your mother never quit. Not when the police walked away from it. Not even when I did. Derek pulled back and wiped his face with the heel of his hand. I know. I went through the case files when I was doing the research. I read the missing person reports, the newspaper pieces. I saw what it cost her. That hit harder than I expected. She died in '95, I said. Pills. The coroner ruled it an accident. I knew better. Not knowing what happened to you, she couldn't carry it. I'm sorry, Derek whispered. If I'd known. If I'd remembered. You were 3 years old. I gripped his shoulder, felt bone beneath the fabric of his coat. None of this was on you. Behind us, Eddie cleared his throat. I'd nearly forgotten he was in the room. When I turned, he was standing at the window, arms folded, expression carefully blank. Dr. Dunning had already slipped out quietly, giving us the space. So what now? Eddie asked. Derek steadied himself visibly. I know this is a lot, he said. And I know dropping the money on you yesterday must have felt like a grenade. But I need you to understand the trust fund isn't just about me. It's about both of us. Your father set it up in 1985, right before I was taken. It was meant to provide for his grandchildren. For me. Hold on. I raised a hand, trying to keep up. My father set up a trust fund. Clifford. Derek nodded. You didn't know. My father and I weren't exactly close, I said carefully. Clifford Kensington Calloway had been a federal prosecutor, the kind of man who processed the world in verdicts and case law. We'd barely exchanged words in the final decade of his life. He died in 2007, left me his house and some savings. Never breathed a word about a trust fund. That's because the fund was structured specifically for his heirs, Derek said. The language is complicated, but the short version is you can't access it directly. Only your biological children can, and only once they turn 35. I stared at him. You're 38. Exactly. Derek's expression shifted, harder to read now. I've been eligible for 3 years, but there's a problem. The trust requires verified identity, DNA proof, and consent from the primary beneficiary, that's you, to release the funds early under something called a non-judicial settlement agreement. How much did you say it was worth? Eddie asked quietly. $140 million, Derek said. Give or take depending on market performance. The figure still didn't land as real. And you need me to sign something? Yes. Derek reached into his canvas shoulder bag and set another folder on the table, thicker this time. I've already been in touch with an estate attorney, Burton Ashford. He's reviewed the trust documents. If you're willing to meet with him, we can start the process. It would mean dividing the funds, $70 million to me, $70 million to you, unless you'd prefer a different arrangement. I looked at Eddie. He gave a small, slow shake of his head. A warning I didn't need. Every instinct I'd built across 35 years of tracking liars was telling me this was too clean, too well-timed. A son who surfaces from nowhere at the precise moment he can legally lay claim to a fortune. But the DNA didn't lie. 99.97%. I need time, I said, to think, to let this settle. Derek nodded, though I watched something flicker across his face. Disappointment quickly buried. Of course, I understand. But Russell, there's something else you need to know. About the trust. About why your father structured it the way he did. About who may have had a hand in my disappearance. My blood went cold. What are you talking about? Your father made enemies, Derek said quietly. Powerful ones. And I think one of them is the reason I was taken. The law offices of Ashford and Associates occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower on Bull Street, the kind of building where the elevator has mirrored walls and the lobby smells like money. I stood outside for a moment, watching my own reflection in the polished doors. Derek had been specific on the phone, a family matter, just the two of us and the estate attorney. I should have brought Eddie anyway. The receptionist pointed me toward a conference room overlooking the city. Derek was already there, seated at a table long enough for 12, wearing a suit that probably ran more than my monthly pension. Across from him sat a man in his 50s, silver hair, expensive tan. Russell. Derek stood and extended his hand. This is Burton Ashford. He's been handling my estate matters. My estate, not our family. Mr. Calloway. Ashford's handshake was practiced. Please sit. Can I get you coffee? I'm fine, let's get to it. Ashford smiled the way attorneys do when they're about to make your life complicated. Your father established the Clifford Kensington Calloway Irrevocable Trust in October of 1985, roughly 3 years after your son was born. The initial funding was approximately $8 million real estate proceeds and inherited wealth. $8 million in 1985. 37 years of growth. As of last quarter, Ashford said, sliding a document across the table, it's worth $141,600,000. The trust has been conservatively invested index funds, bonds, commercial real estate. The number still didn't feel real. My father had been a federal prosecutor, not a mogul. We'd lived comfortably, nothing lavish. The idea that he'd been sitting on all that wealth and never said a word. Why didn't he tell me? Ashford exchanged a glance with Derek. According to a personal note sealed until after his death, your father wanted to provide for his grandchildren without, quote, enabling Russell's self-destructive tendency toward martyrdom. That sounded exactly like Clifford. We'd butted heads about money my entire adult life. Hiding a trust fund because he knew I'd refuse it, that was the kind of controlling move I'd always expected from him. So the money's mine when I turn 65, I said. January 2025. 3 years. Correct. Ashford drew out another document thicker. However, there's an alternative. With all parties consenting, we can modify the trust through a non-judicial settlement agreement under Pennsylvania law. It lets us rewrite the terms without going to court. I looked at Derek. And you want to rewrite the terms? I want what's fair, Derek said carefully. The trust was intended for your grandchildren. I'm the only one. Under the current structure, I receive nothing until you die. That could be decades. I'm 38. I've already lost 35 years. I'm not looking to wait another 30 for what's rightfully mine. So what are you proposing? Ashford tapped the thick document. An agreement that divides the assets $70 million to Derek, immediately $70 million to you. Everyone comes out ahead. Except I have to wait 3 years regardless, I said. Why can't Derek wait 3 years? Derek's jaw tightened. Because I have opportunities right now. Business investments, time-sensitive deals. I've been patient long enough. There it was. The hard edge buried under the measured tone. I'd heard it in interrogation rooms over the years, the sound of someone who'd rehearsed their pitch so many times they'd started to believe it. What kind of opportunities? Private equity real estate developments in Charlotte and the surrounding area. Derek leaned forward. Look, I know you don't know me yet. I know you're being careful. But the DNA doesn't lie. I'm your son. This money was meant for me. I'm asking for access to what's already mine. Ashford slid the document toward me. 52 pages, single-spaced, dense legalese. This is the proposed agreement. It covers terms, distribution schedules, tax implications. All it needs is 3 signatures, yours as trustee, Derek's as blood heir, and mine as executor. I flipped through the pages. Words like decanting spendthrift provisions, fiduciary duty swam together. I need time to review this. Of course. Ashford's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Though I should mention there are tax advantages to executing before end of quarter. Wait too long, and you're both looking at higher capital gains exposure. I don't care about taxes. I care about understanding what I'm signing. Derek rose abruptly. This is exactly what he said you'd do. Who? My attorney. He said Russell Calloway will stall. Find reasons to drag this out and make it harder than it has to be, because deep down he still thinks I'm a stranger trying to run a con on him. Are you? I asked quietly. The room went still. Outside, a siren faded down Bull Street. Derek's face moved through something hurt, first, then anger. See, I spent 15 years in hell because someone took me from you. I lost my mother. I lost my entire childhood. And now, when I finally have a shot at building something, you're going to treat me like I'm a suspect. I'm treating you like someone I met 3 days ago, I said, getting to my feet. Who showed up with a lawyer and a 52-page document asking me to sign over $70 million. What would you have me do? Derek stared. For just a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Calculation, maybe, or frustration. Take the documents, Ashford said smoothly, stepping between us. Review them with your own attorney if you'd like. But I'd encourage you not to wait too long. Derek has mentioned financial obligations deadlines. The longer this sits, the more complicated it gets. I picked up the document. I'll be in touch. Derek said nothing as I crossed to the door. But when I glanced back, he was braced against the table and Burton Ashford was leaning in close, whispering something I couldn't make out. The elevator ride down felt like it took forever. I kept turning over the way Derek had said, "What's already mine?" like the money was a prize waiting to be claimed, and I was just the obstacle standing between him and the finish line. Eddie had been right. Too convenient, too rushed. I needed to read every word of that document, and I needed to find out what Derek wasn't telling me about why he needed $70 million right now. Derek called while I was at my kitchen table staring at the 52-page NJSA document I still hadn't cracked open. His voice had a quality I hadn't heard before. Tight controlled the sound of someone working hard not to seem desperate. "I need to show you something." He said no greeting. "About those investment opportunities. Can you come to my place tonight? It's important." I checked the clock. 6:45. Tonight. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent. "Please, Russell, I think seeing the actual business will help you understand why I need access to the trust fund." Every instinct I had said this was a setup. But I'd spent 35 years as a PI, and the best way to take the measure of a liar is to watch them perform in their own space. See what they've surrounded themselves with. See what they want you to think about them. "Text me the address right now." 40 minutes later, I was standing in the lobby of a high-rise in Charlotte, firing off a text to Eddie with the address and apartment number. "If I don't check in by 9, call me." His reply came back fast. "You armed?" I pressed my hand to the .38 snub nose in my ankle holster. "Old habit." "Yeah. Don't do anything stupid." The elevator to the 17th floor had mirrors and recessed lighting. The hallway smelled like expensive candles and fresh carpet. Derek's door was at the end, number 1702, with a security camera trained on the threshold. He opened it before I knocked. Russell, thanks for coming." He stepped back, waving me inside. "Can I get you a drink? I've got a decent scotch." "I'm good." The penthouse was exactly what I'd pictured. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the uptown Charlotte skyline, leather furniture that looked Italian, and abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than my car. The kind of place designed to announce arrival to anyone who stepped through the door. Derek caught me taking it in. "The view sold me. You can see the whole skyline from the bedroom." "Nice," I said. What I was actually thinking was, how does someone with a struggling business carry the rent on this? He led me to a glass dining table where a laptop sat open beside a stack of folders. "I wanted to show you this in person, because I need you to understand this isn't about greed. It's about survival." I sat across from him with my back to the window so I could watch his face in the overhead light. "I'm listening." Derek opened the top folder and slid a bound document toward me. The cover page read, "Harlow Capital Management, Q4 2021 Financial Audit. My firm manages private equity investments. We've got 3 major clients right now, combined assets under management of roughly $90 million. Last quarter, we made a series of moves into commercial real estate properties in the area, some in Brooklyn. High yield, low risk. Or so we thought." He turned to a page dense with figures. 2 of our biggest deals collapsed in December. The sellers walked away and kept our deposits. We're contractually on the hook to cover the shortfall for our clients by end of week. $8,200,000. I scanned the page. The numbers were clean. Too clean. Round figures, no texture, no supporting documentation. "When was this audit completed?" "Yesterday. I had my accountant rush it." "Oh, what's the firm's name?" Derek blinked. "Sorry. The accounting firm. Who signed off on this?" He hesitated just a fraction of a second too long. "Bradley and Chen, small outfit out of Princeton. I filed that away. Eddie could verify it in 10 minutes. And if you don't cover the $8 million, I lose my clients, my reputation, everything I've put together over the last 5 years." Derek leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "I know what you're thinking. Why don't I liquidate assets, go to a bank? I've tried. The banks won't touch me without collateral, and all my collateral is tied up in the deals that fell through. It's a timing problem. I just need a bridge loan, 72 hours. Then the trust fund paperwork clears, I pay you back with interest, and everyone walks away whole. You want me to give you $8 million. I want you to help your son not lose everything. The shift in his delivery was slight, but unmistakable. Less businessman, more wounded child. I'd watched that pivot 1,000 times. When logic stops working, go for the guilt. Derek. I'm a retired investigator living on a pension. I don't have $8 million in cash. But you have lines of credit, home equity. You could call in favors from people you worked with. No. I pushed the folder back across the table. Even if I could pull together that kind of money, I wouldn't. Not on 72 hours' notice for a business I know nothing about. His jaw tightened. You don't believe me. I didn't say that. You don't have to. I can see it. Derek stood and moved to the window. The city lights bounced off the glass, turning him into a dark shape against the skyline. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You look at me and see a stranger, a con artist, someone trying to steal from you. I see someone asking me for $8 million 3 days after we met. I said carefully. If you were standing where I'm standing, what would you do? He turned, and for a moment, something moved across his face. Not hurt, not anger. Calculation, like he was cycling through options, tossing aside the ones that weren't landing. I'd trust the DNA test, he said at last. I'd remember that my son spent 15 years in hell because someone tore him away from me. I'd ask myself whether maybe, just maybe, he's earned the benefit of the doubt. I got to my feet. The DNA says you're my biological son. That doesn't mean I owe you $8 million. So that's it. You're walking away. I'm going home to think like I said yesterday. I moved toward the door, tracking his reflection in the darkened glass. His hands were clenched, shoulders locked. If your business is as solid as you claim, it'll survive 72 hours. I stopped at the door hand on the knob. And if it doesn't, then I guess we'll both know this was never about building a relationship. It was about the money. The lock clicked. Derek said nothing as I left, but I felt his gaze following me all the way to the elevator. I was halfway across the bridge when my phone rang. Eddie's name on the screen. Tell me you didn't give him anything. I didn't give him anything. What did you find? Harlow Capital LLC Delaware registration from 2016, like I said before. But I kept digging tonight. Reached out to a contact at the SEC. Russell, there is no Harlow Capital Management. No filings, no disclosures, no AUM reports. If this guy is managing $90 million for clients, he's doing it off the books, which means he's doing it illegally. I merged into traffic processing. What about the accounting firm Bradley and Chen Princeton? Doesn't exist. I checked the North Carolina Board of Accountancy. No Bradley, no Chen, no firm by that name registered in the state. The pieces dropped into place. The too clean audit, the round numbers, the urgency. He's running a scam. Yeah, Eddie said quietly. And you're the mark. I'd been awake since 5, sitting at my kitchen table with the 1986 case file spread in front of me like an old wound laid open. 35 years of dead ends, false leads, and questions that had never gotten answers. Somewhere in this stack of yellowed police reports and faded witness statements was a thread I'd missed, something that tied Derek's kidnapping to the man he'd turned into. The phone rang at 11. I knew who it was before I looked. We need to talk, Derek said. No hello, no setup. I'm listening. I gave you a chance to do this the right way. Be a father. Help your son. But you've made it clear that's not going to happen. I leaned back in my chair, phone to my ear, and waited. Let him talk. Let him show me what he really was. So here's how this goes. His voice had gone cold, deliberate. You're going to sign that NJSA by Monday morning, 9 a.m., Burton's office. If you don't, I'm filing a petition with the court to force distribution of the trust fund. I have DNA proof that I'm Clifford's grandson. I have legal standing, And I have a team of attorneys who will keep you buried in litigation for the next 5 years. Go ahead, I said quietly. Silence. He hadn't seen that coming. You think I'm bluffing? I think you're desperate, and desperate people make threats they can't back up. I picked up the fake audit from the night before, the one with the accounting firm that didn't exist. Bradley and Chen don't exist, Derek. Neither does your investment firm. Eddie checked. So whatever story you've been building, the foundation is lies. Another pause. When he came back, the polished businessman was gone. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then walk me through it. Tell me why you actually need $70 million. Tell me who you're in debt to. I don't owe anyone anything. But his voice fractured slightly on the last word. Just a hairline crack, fear bleeding through. You're the one who owes me. You abandoned me 35 years ago. Left me to be sold like property. Your wife gave up and died while I was still out there suffering. And now, when I finally track you down, when I finally have a chance to take what's mine, you treat me like a criminal. You're not the son I thought you were. No, he said. I'm the son you made, and you're going to pay for that. The line cut out. I stared at the phone for a long moment. Then I dialed Eddie. He just called, I said when Eddie picked up. Threatened to sue if I don't sign by Monday. It's empty threat. A court fight would take months, maybe years. He doesn't have that kind of time. I know. Which means whatever he's tangled up in it has a deadline. I closed the 1986 file and made a decision. I need you to put full surveillance on him starting now. I want to know where he goes, who he meets, what he's doing when he thinks no one's paying attention. You want me to tail him? Yeah, be careful. If he's desperate enough to threaten me, he's desperate enough to do something reckless. After we hung up, I went back to the case file. Started at the beginning. January 18th, 1986. 4:15 p.m., Forsyth Park. Diane had been watching Derek on the playground. Turned her back for 30 seconds to tie her shoe. When she looked up, he was gone. No screaming, no struggle. Just gone. The police had worked the case for 6 months. Talked to everyone who'd been in the park that day. Pulled security footage from the surrounding buildings, grainy, useless images that told them nothing. They'd suspected stranger abduction, possibly connected to a trafficking ring working out of the southeast, but never turned up hard evidence. The case went cold in July of 1986. Diane spent the next 6 years looking. Private investigators, psychics, support groups for parents of missing children. Nothing led anywhere. In 1992, she stopped eating, stopped sleeping. Her doctor prescribed something for the anxiety. She took too many one night. The coroner called it accidental. I knew better. I'd blamed myself ever since. I should have been there that day. Should have told her January was too cold for the playground. Should have done something, anything different. And now Derek was back. And instead of giving me any kind of peace, he was trying to strip away everything I had left. My phone buzzed. Text from Eddie Tailing, subject from Penthouse, heading south on 21. I texted back, keep me posted. 2 hours later, Eddie called. Russell, you need to see this. What did you find? He drove to the Port of Savannah industrial area near the shipping terminals. Met 2 men outside a warehouse on Marsh Street. I got photos. My pulse jumped. What kind of men? The kind you only meet in warehouses when you're in serious trouble. Expensive coats. Professional. One of them had a bodyguard. I couldn't get close enough to catch what was being said, but Derek looked scared. Really scared. Send me the photos. My phone chimed half a minute later. 3 images. The first showed Derek beside a black Mercedes talking to a man in his 50s wearing a camel hair overcoat. The second caught Derek passing over an envelope. The third, the one that turned my blood cold, showed the older man gripping Derek's shoulder, leaning in close, saying something that drained the color from Derek's face. "You recognize them?" Eddie asked. "No, but I can make an educated guess." I zoomed in on the older man. Slavic features, cold eyes, the kind of expression you see on people who have done things and don't lose sleep over them. Eastern European, Albanian or Romanian, somewhere in that range. "You think this connects to the kidnapping? I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." I saved the photos, my mind already working the angles. Stay on him. I want everywhere he goes, everyone he talks to. And Eddie, if these men are who I think they are, this stopped being about a trust fund a long time ago. This is about survival. His or yours? Maybe both. Eddie showed up at my place just after 8 on Saturday morning, with 2 laptops and a duffel bag full of equipment I didn't recognize. We set up in my basement office, the same room where I'd worked cases for 35 years. The walls still lined with filing cabinets, the whiteboard still covered in notes from investigations I'd never quite been able to close. "You sure about this?" Eddie asked, firing up his laptop. "What we're about to do is illegal. Federal crime illegal. If we get caught, we're not getting caught." I pulled a chair up beside him. "And I'm not trying to build a court case. I just need to know what we're dealing with." Eddie nodded slowly. "All right. Here's how it works." I send him an email that looks like it came from his lawyer. "What's the name?" "Burton Ashford." Subject line: "Urgent legal matter. Trust fund petition. Needs immediate attention." Derek clicks it open, follows the link, and a remote access payload drops silently onto his machine. From that point on, we owned his screen. Every file, every email, every page he'd ever visited. How long before he opens it? Eddie gave a shrug. Could be 5 minutes, could be 5 hours. Saturday email habits vary. I pictured Derek's desperation, the raw crack in his voice when he'd come at me the day before. A man running that scared doesn't let a weekend slow him down. "Send it," I told Eddie. Derek opened the email at 9:47 a.m. A notification flashed across Eddie's monitor. Remote access established. His desktop materialized in front of us, open tabs, a Word document titled Trust Fund Strategy, and 3 folders sitting right there in the directory Offshore Clients, Kraniki. Jackpot. Eddie breathed, already drilling into the offshore folder. What loaded on screen chilled me to the bone. 47 individual Excel files, each one a separate bank account scattered across different jurisdictions. Cyprus, Malta. 3 institutions registered in Tirana, Albania. The records documented wire transfers going back all the way to 2016. Hundreds of individual movements routed through deliberately tangled pathways to bury where the money was coming from. Shell companies drawing from other shell companies. Sums carved up to fall just short of reporting triggers. The architecture of a professional laundering operation. Eddie surfaced a summary document Derek had assembled, a personal ledger by the look of it. The totals stopped me cold. Total funds processed 2016 to 2021, $312,400,000. Commission earned at 3.5%, $10,934,000. Current liabilities, $25 million. Creditor Kraniki. Payment deadline January 22, 2022. I sat staring at that final entry. 12 days out. "Who is Kraniki?" Eddie asked. "The man from the photos, the port of Savannah." I pulled them up on my phone and enlarged the older man's face. Albanian, no guessing required. "If Derek's been washing money for him, and now he's short $25 million, Eddie said quietly. "Derek's already a dead man walking." I clicked into another file, this one marked client roster, a column of shell company names, each more opaque than the last. Adriatic Holdings, LLC, Eagle Summit Capital. Blue Mountain Investments, every entry cross-referenced to an Albanian address or a contact number. The actual identities were buried down in the notes fields. Arban Kraniki, Luan Hoka, Gent Maru. None of those names meant anything to me, but the shape of it was impossible to misread. These people weren't running legitimate businesses. He's been a bagman for the Albanian mob, I said, talking more to the wall than to Eddie. 5 years, $300 million. Eddie let out a low whistle. Somewhere in the stretch of it, he'd either quietly skimmed $25 million or let it slip through his fingers. I ran the whole picture in my head, Derek's frantic maneuvering, the manufactured audit, the $8 million shakedown, the $70 million trust fund play. Everything resolved into a single explanation. He wasn't grabbing for a future. He was clawing to stay alive. Pull it all down, I said. Every file in that offshore directory. I want a full copy. Eddie's hands moved fast across the keyboard. Russell, he said without looking up, if federal agents have eyes on this operation, and they'd have to be blind not to at this scale, they already know someone walked into his system. Doesn't matter to me. It should, he said. Because if they show up at the door, there's nothing to hide behind. No warrant, no badge, no official sanction. We're a pair of private citizens who just committed a federal crime. I stared at the spreadsheet on that screen, $25 million in arrears, to a man who held meetings with Derek in derelict warehouses. My son is cleaning money for the mob. He came after me for $70 million. And if he can't settle this debt inside 12 days, they will put him in the ground. I caught Eddie's eye. I have to know all of it, he said, legal or otherwise. Eddie studied my face for a long beat. Then he nodded. Fine. But the moment this unravels, and it will, this conversation never happened. Agreed. By 6 p.m., we'd stripped it bare. 312 pages of financial documentation, bank records, wire receipts, correspondence between Derek and his Albanian handlers, dressed up in code, but legible enough to anyone who understood the game. The story those pages told was unambiguous. Derek Harlow had spent 5 years as the primary launderer for one of the most brutal, organized crime networks on the East Coast. Hundreds of millions of dollars cycled through offshore shells, with his commission skimmed off at every turn. Then sometime in the past 12 months, he'd driven off a cliff. A shipment gone missing. Funds he was supposed to safeguard vaporized, whether lost or stolen, I couldn't determine from the paperwork. What remained was a debt no one in his position could survive. The trust fund was never about reconnecting with family. It was a lifeline. I pushed back from the desk, gutted. On the screen, a photograph from Derek's private files, a small boy, 4 or 5 years old, maybe, posed in front of a gray concrete wall. The orphanage in Bucharest almost certainly taken before the adoption, before the name Derek Harlow existed. He really had been ripped from everything. He really had endured 15 years in that world. The DNA had confirmed every bit of that. But the road from that child to this man ran somewhere I couldn't follow. He'd become something unrecognizable, something beyond saving. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Russell Calloway, I said. Mr. Calloway. The voice began measured, unhurried, every syllable calibrated. This is Special Agent Cole Drummond, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I need to discuss your son, Derek Harlow, with you. Could you come in tomorrow morning around 10 a.m. to our Savannah field office? My pulse spiked. What's this regarding? I'd prefer to go through it face to face, but here's what I can share now. For the past 18 months, we've been running a RICO investigation targeting an Albanian organized crime syndicate. Derek Harlow is a named subject, and our surveillance tells us you've been in contact with him recently. I shut my eyes. Naturally, the Bureau had been watching. Naturally, they knew. "I'll be there," I said. "Good. One more thing, Mr. Calloway." Drummond's tone dropped a register, not warmer, just quieter. "Whatever Derek said to you, whatever he's pushed you toward, don't put your name on anything. Don't transfer any funds. And don't extend him your trust. We'll lay out the reasons tomorrow." Then the call ended. Savannah on. A Sunday at 9:30 in the morning is a city holding its breath, a few joggers, the odd delivery van, nothing else moving. I drove through the old squares, past the squares and fountains and bronze figures standing sentinel over a city built on complicated history, and every landmark felt like an accusation. The day before, I had broken federal law. Now here I was pulling into the lot at FBI headquarters, banking on the hope that they'd set that aside long enough to show me the full scope of what had been done to me. The Tomochichi Federal Building and U.S. Courthouse is the kind of structure that was engineered to diminish concrete tinted glass institutional weight, pressing down from every angle. I checked in at security, rode the elevator to the 4th floor. Special Agent Cole Drummond met me at the elevator bank. Early 40s, dark suit credentials on his belt, a wedding band on his left hand, and a face that had cataloged so much damage it no longer registered shock. "Mr. Calloway." His handshake was firm, the grip of someone who'd been taught that projection of authority starts there. "Appreciate you making the time. Come with me." He walked me past a gallery of framed portraits of past directors and into a windowless conference room anchored by a table that could have sat 10. A woman was already positioned at one end laptop, running a sheaf of folders arranged at her elbow. "This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Vanessa Curry," Drummond said. "She's the prosecutor on this case." Curry raised her eyes, quick, precise appraising behind wire-rimmed frames. "Mr. Calloway, sit down, please." I settled into the chair across from her, the distinct sensation of being in a room where the outcome had already been decided, pressing down on me. Drummond took the head of the table, pulled a folder open, and didn't waste time. "We've been running an operation called Silent Ledger for the past 18 months, he said. "RICO case targeting an Albanian organized crime syndicate with operations across North Carolina and New York. Drug trafficking, human trafficking, extortion, money, laundering, the full menu. Our primary target is Arben Krniki, 52 years old, arrived in the U.S. in 1992. He commands the entire network from a social club in Charlotte. We currently hold wiretap authority covering 14 subjects, Krniki and his inner circle among them." He pushed a surveillance photograph across the table toward me. The man from the port of Savannah, expensive coat, eyes like a January morning. One hand clamped on Derek's shoulder. "That's Krniki," Drummond said, "and the man next to him is your son." I looked at the image. "I know. My associate shot those on Friday." Drummond absorbed that without a flicker. "We're aware. Derek has been under our surveillance since July of 2020. We've had access to his digital communications, throughout which is precisely how we learned that you were in his system yesterday morning." My gut went hollow. "Is this where you put cuffs on me?" "No," Curry said. First time she'd spoken flat, precise, prosecutorial to the syllable. "We're here because we want your help. But you need to see clearly what your son actually is before we go any further." Drummond laid a second file on the table, thicker than the first, dense with financial paperwork. "Derek Harlow has been running Krniki's money since 2016. Over $300 million pushed through offshore accounts in Cyprus, Malta, and Albania. His cut runs about 3.5%. Just under 11 million across 5 years. I know, I said quietly. I saw the records. Then you also know he's 25 million in debt to Kraniki. What you don't know is why. Vanessa Khoury opened her laptop and rotated it to face me. The screen showed a transaction history entries, highlighted in yellow transfers flowing into casino accounts in Atlantic City and Macau. He'd gambled it away. It started small in 2019, picked up speed in 2020. By last summer, he'd burned through everything he'd earned and started dipping into funds he was supposed to be holding on behalf of Kraniki. When Kraniki discovered the shortfall, he handed Derek a deadline. Repay the 25 million by January 22nd, or face the consequences. January 22nd. 9 days from now. That's when Derek found you, Drummond said. Or more precisely, that's when he chose to use you. I looked up. What do you mean? Khoury slid another document across a 23andMe ancestry report, dated April 2019. Derek had submitted a DNA sample to a consumer genetics service 2.5 years ago. The results came back with a close family match, Russell Calloway Savannah. He started digging into your life. He found the 1986 kidnapping. Found out about the trust fund your father had set up. Then he built a plan. The walls of the room seemed to press inward. He'd known who I was for 2 years. 2 years and 9 months, Khoury corrected. He held off until November of last year to make contact, because that's when the trust fund would be close enough to maturity. You turned 65 in 2025, 3 years out, just enough distance to make the urgency feel real. He engineered the entire narrative, the victim's story, the suffering, the long-awaited reunion. All of it calibrated to maneuver you into signing over $70 million. I thought about the way Derek had wept at the lab. The embrace. The way he'd said, "I'm sorry," as if he meant every syllable. If the DNA test was real, I said, 99.97%. The biology is real. Drummond confirmed. Derek is your son. The kidnapping in 1986 was real. But the story he fed you about everything that came after the trafficking, the orphanage, the innocent man trying to find his father, that was fabricated. Derek wasn't trafficked. He was taken as part of a coordinated strike against your family. My blood went cold. What? Drummond drew out an aged, file-yellowed newspaper clippings from 1982. Your father, Clifford Kensington Calloway, was a federal prosecutor. In 1982, he put Angelo Battaglia, underboss of an Albanian crime family, away on racketeering charges, 25 years in federal prison. The Battaglia family swore they'd make it right. 4 years later, they did. They took your son. I couldn't find heir. They kidnapped Derek to punish my father. Yes. But rather than killing him, which had been the original plan, they kept him. Raised him inside the organization. Taught him the trade. By the time he was 18, Derek was working for them. Money laundering mostly. He's talented at it. So he's been a criminal his entire life. I said more to myself than either of them. Since he was old enough to know what he was doing, yes. Khoury's tone softened just slightly. I understand this is devastating to hear, but you need to see clearly the man who sat across from you and wept about being your son. That was a performance. A skilled one, but a performance all the same. He doesn't want a relationship with you. He wants the trust fund. And once he gets it, or once he accepts he can't, he'll vanish. Drummond leaned forward. Or he'll turn up dead. Because Kraniki doesn't forgive a $25 million debt. I sat with my hands flat on the table, trying to absorb it. Everything I'd let myself believe that Derek had been stolen had suffered, had found his way back to me, damaged, but real. All of it built by hand. A con, the cruelest kind of con, because it had been seeded with a truth I'd spent decades aching to hold on to. Why are you telling me all this? I finally asked. Because we need your help, Khoury said. Derek won't work with us voluntarily. He's too enmeshed with Kraniki, too frightened of what retaliation looks like. But if we can get him on tape confessing to the money laundering the offshore accounts, the full operation, we can use that confession to flip him. Have him testify against Kraniki in exchange for a reduced sentence. And you want me to get that confession? Aye. You're the only one he'll speak freely with, Drummond said. He believes you still trust him. He thinks he can still work you into signing the trust fund papers. If you meet with him wearing a wire and steer him toward the money he owes Kraniki and the offshore accounts, we can build on that. I looked at them both. And if I refuse, Derek goes to prison eventually anyway, Khoury said. But it takes longer. More resources, more risk that Kraniki's people shred evidence or disappear. And while the clock runs out, Derek is a dead man who just hasn't fallen yet. 9 days, Mr. Calloway. That's all he has left. Drummond's face stayed carefully neutral. We can protect him if he cooperates, but we need that tape. I thought about Diane, the 6 years she'd spent searching for our son, the belief that had kept her breathing until it couldn't anymore. I thought about the DNA test that said this man was hers, was mine. And I thought about the way Derek had looked at me across the conference table at Burton Ashford's office. What's rightfully mine? Like I was nothing but a turnstile. Will you help us take him down? Khoury asked. I didn't answer. Couldn't. Because somewhere inside the wreckage of the past week, I'd stopped being able to tell the difference between justice and revenge. I spent Sunday night at my kitchen table staring at a photograph I'd looked at 1,000 times. Diane, maybe a year before she died, standing in Forsyth Park, a fistful of missing person flyers in her hand. Someone had caught her smiling, probably one of the other parents from the support group, a candid shot, but her eyes were hollow. The smile never made it that far. By Monday morning, I still hadn't slept. The 1986 case file was fanned out in front of me again, pages I'd memorized long ago, now feeling like relics from a life that belonged to someone else. Police reports, witness statements. The photo of Derek at 3 years old, the one I'd pressed into the hands of every stranger, every cop, every investigator who would sit still long enough to look. The FBI had handed me a choice: help them bring down my son or let him die. Except it was never really a choice. Not when you cleared everything else away. Derek was a criminal, a liar, a man who'd looked me straight in the eye and assembled a false life brick by brick to exploit me. But he was also the reason Diane had kept breathing for 6 years after he vanished. The reason she'd gotten out of bed every morning. In some way, the reason she died. I picked up my phone, set it down, picked it up again. At noon, Eddie called. You decide yet? No preamble. No. You want to talk it through? I rubbed my face, felt the exhaustion deep in my bones. What is there to talk through? The FBI wants me to betray my son. If I cooperate, he spends the rest of his life in prison. If I don't, he's dead in 8 days. Sutton 9, Eddie corrected quietly. Wait, today's the 13th. Right, 8 days. You want my take? Eddie asked. No, but go ahead. Biologically, yeah, he's your son. But Russell, you don't owe him a thing. He's been running a con on you since the moment he sat down. Everything he said, everything he showed you, it was all part of the play. The DNA is real. But that person, that's not the child you lost. That child's been gone 35 years. I looked at Diane's photograph, at the emptiness behind her eyes. She never stopped believing he was out there, I said. Even at the end, even after the cops said he was dead, after the case went cold, after everyone told her to move on, she knew. And I didn't believe her. I gave up. Eddie was quiet for a long moment. You didn't give up. You survived. There's a difference. Is there? Yeah. And I think Diane would have wanted you to survive this too. Whatever you decide, help the FBI or don't, I've got your back. But don't do it out of guilt for something that happened 35 years ago. Do it because it's the right call now. I don't know what the right call is anymore. Shai, then you're asking the wrong question, Eddie said. It's not about right or wrong. It's about what you can live with. Vanessa Khoury called at 6 p.m. Mr. Calloway, we need an answer. Clipped. Professional. The operation timeline is tight. If you agree to wear a wire, prep starts tomorrow. Training equipment fitting scenario rehearsal. The meeting with Derek is set for January 22nd, 10 a.m. The Bryce Hotel, downtown Savannah. Public venue, controlled environment. You want me to face him the same day Kroniki's debt comes due, I said. That's intentional. Derek will be at his most cornered, most likely to speak freely about the debt, the offshore accounts, the whole operation. We need him to admit on tape that he owes Kroniki $25 million and that he tried to defraud you of the trust fund. With that confession, we can flip him offer reduced sentencing in exchange for testimony against Kroniki. And if he won't flip, he goes to prison for a very long time. Khoury paused. But at least he'll be alive. If you don't help us, Mr. Calloway, Derek Harlow will be dead before the week is out. Kroniki doesn't negotiate. He doesn't forgive. $25 million is a death sentence. I shut my eyes and thought about Diane finding Derek in the park, that last time crouching to tie her shoe, glancing up, and finding him gone. 30 seconds. That's all it costs to lose everything. I need to think, I said. You've had 24 hours to think. We need an answer. The line went dead. Cole Drummond called at 7. Russell, it's Cole. I know Vanessa came on strong, that's what she does. But I want you to hear something. His voice had dropped from the official register I'd known in the FBI office, quieter, more human. I've been doing this 16 years. Organized crime mostly. I've seen what happens to people who end up owing money to men like Arbin Kraniki. It's not fast. It's not clean. And it never stops at the person who owes it, reaches out to the family, the friends, anyone who might know where they've gone. You're saying Derek is already dead? I'm saying he has one chance. Cooperate with us. Testify against Kroniki. Enter witness protection if it comes to that. We can keep him safe, but only if he gives us something worth protecting him for. And you think he'll do that? I think he will if you're the one who asks him to. Cole let that breathe for a moment. You were a PI for 35 years. You know how this works. You know when someone is past the point of pulling themselves out. Derek is there. You're not. You can still walk away clean, or you can give him a shot at something other than a bullet in the back of the head. I turned that over in my mind. Thought about what Derek had said in Burton Ashford's office. You abandoned me 35 years ago. Now you owe me. Maybe I had, maybe I hadn't. But Diane had never abandoned him. Not once. Not until her heart finally gave out under the weight of all that hoping. Well, if I do this, I said slowly, I need a guarantee. You protect him. After the wire, after he talks, Kroniki doesn't get to him. Not in jail, not in witness protection. Not ever. If Derek cooperates, we protect him, Cole said. You have my word. At 8 p.m., I called Cole back. I'll do it, I said. But I have one condition. Name it. You protect my son. Whatever he's done, whatever he deserves, you keep him alive. That's the deal. Cole didn't hesitate. Deal. Be at the field office tomorrow 9 a.m. We start prep. I hung up and stayed at the kitchen table a long time after that, looking at Diane's photograph, wondering if she'd forgive me for what I was about to do. Wondering if I'd ever forgive myself. But Eddie was right. It wasn't about right or wrong anymore. It was about what I could live with. And I couldn't live with letting Derek die. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd been running the same conversation for 6 hours straight, and I still sounded like I was reading off a cue card. "Try it again," Cole said from the corner of the safe house conference room. "And this time, stop asking questions like you're working a suspect. You're his father. You're wounded. You need to understand why he looked you in the eye and lied." Across the table, FBI agent Lena Covington sat with her arms folded, playing the role of Derek for what felt like the 100th time. She was good cold guarded, that precise blend of desperation and arrogance I'd glimpsed in my son. I drew a breath and started again. "Derek, I need you to be straight with me about the money, about Arben Kraniki, about why you really came looking for me." Lena leaned back, eyes narrowing. "I already told you. I needed help. I needed family. You're the one who's making this complicated. But the offshore accounts, the 300 million, that's..." Vanessa Khoury cut me off from her seat by the window, laptop open beside a legal pad, dense with notes. "You're leading him. A defense attorney tears that apart in court. You can't hand him what you know. You have to let him bring it forward himself." I pressed my palms against my face, felt the exhaustion gathering behind my eyes. "I've been at this for 6 hours. How do I get him to confess without putting the words in his mouth?" "Shall you let him fill the silence?" Cole said, pushing back from his seat and moving to the table. "Watch." He settled across from Lena, and everything about him shifted, shoulders loose, voice low, almost hollowed out. "I don't understand why you lied to me. I spent 35 years thinking you were dead. Your mother died believing you were dead. And now you're sitting here, and nothing you've told me holds together. Just help me understand." Silence. Lena, still in character, let Derek's composure fracture just slightly. "I needed the money," she said at last, quieter. "That's the truth. I'm in trouble, and the trust fund was the only way out." Cole leaned in, not pressing, just grieving. "What kind of trouble?" And just like that, the door swung open. Lena kept going, filling the quiet with details, admissions, exactly the kind of uncoerced confession Vanessa needed. Cole stood and looked at me. "You see the difference? You're a father, not an investigator. Derek needs to feel like he's explaining himself to you, not defending himself under a lamp." "I get it," I said. "But Cole, I'm not performing. I am hurt. I am desperate to understand. The problem is I already know the answers. How do I act like I don't?" "You don't act," Vanessa said, closing her laptop. "You let your real feelings run the room. The anger, the betrayal, the grief, all of that is genuine. Use it. Just don't tell him what to say. Let him say it himself." At 4 o'clock, the tech team arrived to fit the equipment. The pen camera was smaller than I'd expected, indistinguishable from the cheap ballpoints I'd carried for 30 years. The FBI technician, a quiet guy in his 20s, who looked like he hadn't spent much time outside a lab, walked me through it. "It's a working pen, writes fine, but the camera sits in the clip here." He clicked the top. "That starts recording. The pen camera has 6 hours of battery 1080p video. Keep it in your vest pocket, angled upward for face shots. Don't fidget with it. Don't keep clicking it. Put it in your pocket and leave it alone." The audio transmitter was stitched into a leather belt, the kind I'd buckled on every morning for 20 years. The technician cinched it around my waist and adjusted the small microphone tucked inside the buckle. "Look, this feeds real-time to our surveillance van. We'll be sitting 1 block from the Bryce Hotel. If the signal drops, we abort." "Understood." Cole held out a small object the size of a quarter edges, smooth, a single button centered on one face. "Panic button. If Derek gets physical, if anything feels wrong, you press this. Tactical team breaches in 10 seconds. They'll be staged in the hotel basement and the building next door. You'll never be more than 50 feet from backup." I turned it over in my hand. 10 seconds. That was either nothing at all or an eternity, depending on what Derek chose to do. What if he checks me for a wire? I asked. He will, Vanessa said. That's why your phone stays in the car. Tell him you forgot it. He'll go through your pockets, maybe pat you down. The pen looks like a pen. The belt looks like a belt. Unless he's sweeping you with a frequency detector, which we don't believe he has access to, he won't find anything. And if he does, you hit the button, Cole said simply. But Russell, we've run this play 200 times. Criminals expect the sophisticated hardware phones, smartwatches, hidden earpieces. They don't look for a pen and a belt. Too old-fashioned. Too low-tech. I thought about Derek sitting across from me in Burton Ashford's office, checking my phone to confirm I wasn't recording. The way he'd studied my face at his penthouse, hunting for the faintest sign of deception. He's smart, I said. Smarter than you're giving him credit for. He's been shaped by people who kill for a living. If I give him any reason, see, then don't, Vanessa said, cutting across me. You're his father. You're broken over this. You agreed to meet him one last time because you want answers. That's your story. You hold on to it. At 5 o'clock, we ran the scenario one more time. This time I didn't sound like a detective. I sounded like a man who'd had everything stripped away and needed to know why. Lena, playing Derek, cracked in 4 minutes, admitted the debt, admitted the fraud, admitted she'd known about the trust fund for 2 years, and had engineered the whole thing from the start. When we wrapped, Vanessa gave a single nod. That'll work. Get that on tape and we have what we need to flip him. Cole walked me to the door of the safe house. Outside, the January cold was the biting kind, the sort that found its way through your jacket and settled deep in your chest. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., Cole said. The Bryce Hotel main restaurant. We'll have 15 agents inside, all undercover diners, wait staff, bartenders. You won't be alone for a second. He paused, held my gaze. But Russell, once you step into that room, there's no going back. Derek is going to say things you won't want to hear. You'll be recording him confess to crimes that will put him away for the rest of his life. And when it's done, he'll know you're the one who set him up. He'll hate you for it. I know. Do you? Cole's voice stayed quiet. In my experience, understanding something in your head and actually carrying it afterward, those are two completely different things. I thought about Diane. The way she'd looked at Derek's photo each night before she went to bed, as if concentration alone could pull him back into the world. The 6 years she'd held on to hope, and the 30 years I'd spent regretting that I had let go. How this might be the last real conversation I ever have with my son, I said. Either he goes to prison and never speaks to me again, or Krenicki's people finish it before the day is out. Either way, tomorrow is the end. Cole didn't argue with that. If it helps at all, you're doing the right thing. You're giving him a shot at life, even if it's a life behind bars. That's more than he deserves. Maybe. I pulled my coat tighter against the wind. But it doesn't feel like enough. It never does, Cole said. So are you ready for this? I looked back at the safe house, at the lit windows where Vanessa and the tech team were breaking down equipment, at the pen camera in my pocket, and the belt transmitter snug around my waist. No, I said. But I'll be there anyway. I couldn't sleep. Hadn't really thought I would. At 11 p.m. the night before, I was set to betray my son. I sat at the kitchen table with the lights off, staring at a photograph that had been in the same frame for 37 years. Summer of 1985. Diane, Derek, and me on the front steps of our house on Habersham Street. Derek was maybe 2.5, perched on Diane's lap, gripping a popsicle that was melting faster than he could manage it. Diane was laughing at something I'd said. I was facing the camera, but my hand was resting on her shoulder, and we looked happy. 6 months after that picture was taken, everything ended. January 18th, 1986, 4:15 in the afternoon, Forsyth Park. I wasn't there. I was working a case insurance fraud, something that meant nothing then and means even less now. Diane had taken Derek to the playground because he'd been cooped up inside all week. It was cold, but the sun was out, and he had energy to burn. She told me later, when the police made her walk through it for the 5th time, that she'd had her eyes on him at the slide. He'd gone down 3 times, climbed back up, gone down again. She crouched to tie her shoe. 30 seconds, maybe less. When she looked up, he was gone. No screaming, no struggle. Nobody saw a thing. The park wasn't crowded. It was a winter afternoon, and most families had stayed indoors, but there were people around. Dog walkers, joggers. Someone should have seen something. No one did. Diane called me at 4:30. I was 20 minutes away. By the time I arrived, she'd already phoned the police, already covered every corner of the park, already stopped strangers to ask if they'd spotted a small boy in a blue coat with a dog print on it. The police treated it as a stranger abduction from the start. They interviewed everyone present that day, pulled security footage from the buildings ringing the square, grainy, useless, told them nothing. They worked the case hard for 6 months. Then it went cold. Diane never stopped. She printed flyers, showed up at support groups for parents of missing children, hired private investigators when the money wasn't there to spare, consulted psychics, drove to New York to Baltimore to anywhere a report surfaced about a child who might be Derek. I quit in 1992. Told myself he was gone. Told myself we had to find a way forward or the grief would consume us both. I was right about the second part. Diane died in August of that year. The coroner ruled it an accidental overdose. She'd been prescribed medication for anxiety and took too many one night. I found her in our bedroom, still holding the photograph from 1985. There was no note. I never knew whether it was an accident or whether she had simply decided she couldn't face one more day of not knowing what happened to him. She wasn't taken with Derek. People sometimes get that confused when I've told this story over the years. She was right there that afternoon, watching him play, doing what any mother does on a January day. She turned away for 30 seconds. When she looked back up, he was gone. She spent 6 more years searching for him. Then the grief finished her. I spread the 1986 case file across the table the way I had 100 times before police reports, witness statements, photographs of the park, the flyer Diane had made with Derek's picture and our phone number. And buried in the middle on page 47 of a 52-page report was a detail I'd been walking past for 35 years. Witness dog walker, male 60s, reported black Mercedes sedan, older model, parked on Bull Street, adjacent to park, 4 o'clock to 4:20 p.m. Partial plate foreign registration, possibly Albanian. Vehicle departed scene 4:22 p.m. direction westbound. I sat back, the pieces locked into place. The FBI had told me Derek's kidnapping was ordered by Angelo Battaglia, the Albanian mob boss my father had convicted in 1982, payback for putting Battaglia away for 25 years. I'd heard the story. I'd absorbed it. But I hadn't connected it to the black Mercedes, to the fact that someone had been watching that park, biding their time. It wasn't opportunistic. It was never opportunistic. Someone had targeted my family, watched us, waited until Diane was alone with Derek, took him as the price for what my father had done, and I had missed it. For 35 years, the evidence had been sitting inside a police report I'd read 100 times, and I'd never seen it. I found myself wondering whether my father had known, whether Clifford had suspected that the Battaglia family might eventually come for the people around him and had never said a word. Whether he'd set up that trust fund in 1985 because he sensed something was coming. The anger I felt toward a man who'd been dead for 15 years surprised me with how sharp it still was. I took out a piece of paper and started writing. I wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe there were things I needed to put somewhere other than the inside of my own skull. Maybe I needed to say them even if they'd never be heard out loud. Derek. I wanted you back for 35 years. Every day. Every case I worked. Every missing child I brought home to someone else's family. I was looking for you. But not like this. Your mother never stopped believing you were alive. She died still believing it. I gave up. That's my failure, not yours. Tomorrow I'm going to betray you. I'm going to record you confessing to crimes that will lock you away for the rest of your life. I'm doing it because it's the only path that keeps you alive. The FBI says if you cooperate, they can protect you. If you don't, Kroniki's people will finish it before the day is out. I don't know if any part of the boy I lost is still somewhere inside the man you became. But if there is, I'm sorry. I failed you twice. Once when I let them take you. And again now when I have to let them put you away. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me either. I folded the letter and slid it into the drawer where I kept Diane's journal and the old case files. Maybe one day I'd hand it to him. Maybe not. It didn't matter. Putting it down on paper was enough. My phone buzzed on the table. Text from Cole Drummond. 7 a.m. Command van 2 blocks south of the Bryce Hotel. Don't be late. And Russell, get some sleep. You'll need it. I looked at the clock. 11:45. What comes next is the moment I had to face the full weight of what the person I loved most had actually done, and what it would cost me to see it through to the end. Before I tell you how it unfolded, let me ask if someone you deeply trusted turned out to be working against you all along. Would you confront them face to face, or would you gather every piece of proof in silence first? In 7 hours and 15 minutes, I'd clip on the wire walk into that hotel restaurant and sit across from my son for what might be the last conversation we'd ever share. I thought about Diane, the way she used to sit at this very table staring at Derek's photo, willing him to come home, about how she'd kept herself going for 6 years on nothing but hope, and how that hope had slowly eaten her alive. I'd spent 35 years aching for one more chance to find him, to bring him back to repair what had been shattered that afternoon in Forsyth Park. Tomorrow I'd get that chance, and I was going to use it to destroy him. I closed the case file, switched off the kitchen light, and tried to sleep. It didn't work. But somewhere before dawn, I stopped trying to decide whether what I was doing was right or wrong, and started holding on to the only thing that mattered, keeping my son alive, even if it meant he'd spend the rest of his days hating me for it. That was something I could live with. Barely. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw that line from the police report. Black Mercedes sedan, foreign registration, possibly Albanian. At 11:30, I gave up and went to my office, opened the laptop, and started digging. Clifford Kensington Calloway, Angelo Battaglia, 1982. The first result was a Savannah Morning News article from March 12, 1982. Headline: Federal Prosecutor Breaks Albanian Mob Ring. I clicked through and scanned the text. My father's name appeared in the second paragraph. Assistant U.S. Attorney Clifford Kensington Calloway secured a guilty verdict Tuesday against Angelo Battaglia, 45, underboss of the Curie crime family. Battaglia was convicted on 14 counts of racketeering, drug trafficking, and conspiracy to commit murder. He faces 25 years in federal prison. There was a photograph. My father on the courthouse steps younger than I remembered, gripping a briefcase, looking straight into the camera with the kind of assurance that only comes from winning. Standing next to him in handcuffs was Angelo Battaglia. Heavy-set dark eyes, the look of a man who kept accounts. I kept reading. Found another piece from 3 days later, smaller, buried on page 7. Convicted mobster threatens prosecutor's family. Angelo Battaglia, recently sentenced to 25 years for racketeering, was removed from the courtroom Friday after shouting threats at AUSA Clifford Calloway. "Your bloodline will pay," Battaglia reportedly said. "Everything you love will be taken." I pushed back from the screen, hands not quite steady. My father had known. He'd known Angelo Battaglia wanted revenge, and he'd never breathed a word of it to us. I kept digging. Found FBI case files declassified in 2007, 15 years after my father retired. One document stopped me cold, an intercepted letter from Angelo Battaglia to his nephew dated June 1984. 2 years after the trial. 2 years before Derek was taken. The letter was written in broken English, clearly translated from Albanian. Arban. "The time is coming. The prosecutor thinks he is safe because I am in prison. He is wrong. His family will learn what it means to take from us. The bloodline must be cut. You will handle this when you are ready. Do not act until I give word." A.B. Arban Kraniki. I ran another search. Angelo Battaglia family tree. 20 minutes and 3 genealogy databases later, I had it. Angelo Battaglia had a sister, Lumnije Battaglia, who married a man named Genti Kraniki in 1965. They had one son, Arban Kraniki, born 1970, age 52. The same man Derek owed $25 million to. The same man who had handed Derek a death sentence deadline of January 22nd tomorrow if he didn't pay. Angelo Battaglia's nephew. This wasn't just organized crime, it was family business. Generational revenge. I kept pulling threads. Found adoption records cross-referenced with FBI files I'd pulled from Derek's laptop and pieced together a timeline that turned my stomach. In January 1986, Derek was taken not by random traffickers, but by Angelo Battaglia's crew acting on orders from inside prison. The plan had been to kill him. Maximum pain for my father. But Battaglia's wife, a mother herself, stepped in. Convinced Angelo to sell the boy instead. $60,000 to a Romanian trafficking ring. Year 1997. Derek was adopted by an American couple given the name Derek Harlow, told he was an orphan whose parents had died in an accident. Year 2002. Arban Kraniki tracked him down. I didn't know exactly how adoption records, DNA databases, Albanian mob networks threaded through Europe and into the U.S. Kraniki approached Derek when he was 19, handed him part of the truth, that he'd been kidnapped as a child, that his birth family had abandoned him, that the Kraniki family had rescued him. Derek believed it. Why wouldn't he? He had no memory of me, of Diane, of the life he'd lived before the age of 3. Kraniki became his mentor. His handler trained him in money laundering, offshore accounts, the mechanics of moving cash for criminal enterprises. By 2016, Derek was skilled enough to manage $300 million. Then, in 2019, Derek submitted a DNA sample to 23, and me, probably out of curiosity, probably never expecting a match. The results came back. Russell Calloway, Savannah. Biological father. That's when Derek started researching. Found the 1986 kidnapping case. Found my father's obituary from 2007. Found the probate records showing the trust fund $140 million established 1985 distribution at age 65, or with blood heir consent. Derek understood what he was, the heir to a fortune. The son of a man who hadn't abandoned him. A piece moved on a chessboard in a 40-year revenge plot. But he was too deep inside the organization to walk away. He owed Kraniki his life. Or thought he did. And when Derek started losing money, gambling, the debt climbing to $25 million, Kraniki didn't cut him loose. He set a deadline. January 22nd, the same week I turned 62, 3 years before the trust fund reached maturity. That was no coincidence. I sat back from the laptop, the full picture finally assembled. Arbin Krenicki had let Derek accumulate that debt, had fed him just enough rope, and then he'd sprung the trap. Steal from your father, drain the trust fund, gut the Calloway family legacy, or die trying. Either way, Krenicki won. If Derek succeeded, the trust fund, my father's final act, the thing he'd built to protect his grandchildren, would be hollowed out. If Derek failed, Krenicki would kill him and I'd lose my son a second time. The perfect revenge. 40 years in the making. Angelo Battaglia had died in prison in 2012. But his nephew had inherited the vendetta, and Derek, stolen from us as a child, raised as a weapon, then pointed at his own family, had no idea he was someone else's endgame. I thought about tomorrow, about sitting across from Derek at the Bryce Hotel with a wire on, recording him confessing to crimes that would put him away for decades. And I understood that Derek was both victim and perpetrator. He had been stolen from me. Now he was trying to steal from me. The boy I'd lost was gone. The man in his place was broken, manipulated, locked inside a cycle of violence that had started before he was even old enough to remember his own name. I didn't know if I could save him, but I knew this much: Arbin Krenicki didn't get to win. Not after 35 years. Not after everything he'd taken from my family. Tomorrow I'd get Derek on tape. The FBI would flip him, protect him, use him to dismantle Krenicki's entire operation. And maybe somewhere in the rubble I'd find a way to reach the son I'd lost. The clock on the laptop read 2:17 a.m. In less than 5 hours, I'd be sitting in an FBI command van getting wired up for the most important conversation of my life. I shut the laptop and stared at the wall. And finally, I understood why my father had established that trust fund in 1985. He'd known the Battaglia family would come for us. He'd tried to protect us the only way available to him. It hadn't been enough. But tomorrow I'd finish what he started. I'd slept maybe 2 hours, maybe less. By 6 a.m., I was through the doors of the FBI field office, running on dark roast and adrenaline. Cole Drummond and Vanessa Khoury were waiting in the same conference room where they'd briefed me 10 days ago. The table was covered with fresh files, surveillance photos, and a tactical map studded with red pins. "Ma, we have new intel," Cole said before I'd even made it to a chair. "Came through last night. Changes the operation." I dropped into a seat, too worn down to stay on my feet. "What kind of changes?" Vanessa opened her laptop and turned it to face me. On the screen was a surveillance photograph of a woman I'd glimpsed exactly once at Derek's penthouse, briefly in the background. Dark hair, mid-30s, the kind of careful attractiveness that came from expensive salons and attentive dermatologists. "Cassie Harlow," Vanessa said. "Derek's wife. We flipped her last week." I stared at the photo. "What?" "January 15th. Cole said, drawing out a file. "We approached her at the penthouse while Derek was out. Gave her 2 options: cooperate and receive immunity, or go down alongside her husband on RICO charges. Option 1. That's what she picked." "So what did Cassie turn over?" "Everything." Vanessa brought up a new screen: account numbers, passwords, encrypted message logs. Derek's laptop password, direct access to his offshore holdings in Cyprus, Malta, and 3 Albanian banks. His meeting schedule with Arbin Krenicki, today's included. She'd been our inside source for a full week. I leaned back and let that land. Derek's own wife had handed the Bureau everything it needed to dismantle him. My next question came out low. "Where is she?" "Witness protection," Cole said. "New identity paperwork in motion as of last night. She testifies at trial next year, but right now she's completely off the map." "Does Derek have any idea?" "Not a clue, and it stays that way until after today." Vanessa shut the laptop. Cassie filed for divorce 2 days ago, January 20th. Papers haven't been served. We're sitting on them until the arrests are done. But Russell, before you walk in there this morning, you have to understand who you're dealing with. He's completely exposed. His wife walked away without him knowing. His mob debt comes due before the day ends. He's cornered, cut off with nothing left to play. I sat with that. Derek up in his penthouse carrying on like Cassie was still in his corner, still loyal, while she'd spent a week feeding his secrets to the FBI and quietly building her way out as he unraveled. That kind of invisible betrayal, I knew it from somewhere deep. Why was I kept in the dark on this? I asked. Operational security, Vanessa said flatly. The smaller the circle around Cassie, the safer she was. You're hearing it now because it changes today's picture. Cole put his elbows on the table and laced his hands together. Here's how it unfolds. 4 operations running simultaneously, all triggered at 11 a.m. While you're getting Derek on tape at the Bryce Hotel, 3 other targets go down at the same moment. He pointed to the tactical map. Red pins at 4 locations across Savannah and North Carolina. Location 1, the Bryce Hotel. You sit down with Derek at 10 o'clock. Confession on tape by 10:45. 11 o'clock we move in and take him. Location 2, Port of Savannah Warehouse. Arbin Krenicki meets his lieutenants at 11 a.m. to work through Derek's debt. Tactical unit staged to breach. Krenicki, 6 enforcers and roughly $12 million in cash, all seized. Location 3. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. 3 Albanian couriers booked on an 11:30 flight to Tirana carrying $8 million in duffel bags. We pull them at the gate. Location 4, Derek's penthouse in Charlotte. Cassie turns over his laptop, offshore account records, USB drives, whatever's in the safe. Full evidence sweep. I studied the map, those red pins, the timing engineered to the minute. You're using Derek as the hook. It's the circumstances we're exploiting, Vanessa said. Krenicki has no reason to think anything is wrong. His read is that Derek is desperately trying to scrape the money together, that this morning's meeting is about locking down the trust fund transfer. The idea that Derek is about to put it all on record, that hasn't crossed Krenicki's mind. By the time it does, he'll already be cuffed. But what if Krenicki's people start connecting dots? I said, what if they figure out Derek is the thread that led you to Arbin? Won't happen, Cole said. Because Arbin gets taken at the exact same moment as Derek. Simultaneous takedown. Before anyone in that organization can piece it together, the entire upper tier will be in federal custody. And then what I pressed. Once Derek's behind bars and the word spreads, Cole's face didn't shift. Protective custody, day 1. Isolated unit 24/7 guards, no exposure to general population. Full cooperation testimony against Krenicki at trial that opens the door to witness protection post-sentencing, reduced time, a new life. When he gets out. If he cooperates, I said again. That's your job, Vanessa said. She slid 1 sheet of paper across the table. Typed checklist bullet points. The specific admissions required for a prosecutable confession. 1. I owe Arbin Krenicki $25 million. 2. I plan to steal the trust fund through a fraudulent NJSA agreement. 3. I have been laundering money through offshore accounts since 2016. All 3 clearly voluntarily on tape, Vanessa said. Without that, we can't flip him. And without the flip, there's no protecting him. I stared at the page. 3 lines. 3 confessions that would put my son away for the rest of his life. What if he won't go there, I asked. What if the tape runs, and he still shuts down Cole? And Vanessa looked at each other. Trial, Vanessa said. And based on what we already hold, the offshore records, the wire transfers Cassie's testimony, he's looking at life, no parole. No arrangement, no safety net. and Krenicki's reach finds him eventually inside or out. So either way, he doesn't survive this, I said quietly. Unless I get those words out of him. Unless he trusts me just long enough. You're not ending him, Cole said softer than Vanessa. You're handing him the only exit that still exists. Last one available. I looked at the checklist again. $25 million. NJSA fraud. Offshore accounts. And I thought about Derek in that penthouse right now, Cassie gone from his life without him knowing it. The FBI already 3 moves ahead, and in 4 hours, his father, the man he'd manipulated, deceived, tried to rob walking through the door to close it out. He's going to hate me for this, I said. Probably, Cole said, but he'll be alive. I folded the page and slid it into my jacket. When do we move to the command van? 7 a.m. 2 blocks south of the hotel. We wire you up, walk through the scenario a final time, and get the team set. Cole got up. Russell, this holds together, but only if you stay sharp in that room. Derek is desperate. He's vulnerable. Work with that. Keep him talking. Whatever unfolds in there, don't lose sight of why you're doing it. Not to hurt him. To save him. I nodded. Couldn't find words, because honestly, I no longer knew which one I was doing, saving Derek or ending him. Maybe those were the same thing now. The command van reeked of stale coffee and warm electronics. I sat on a metal bench welded to the floor and watched 6 monitors cycling through feeds from inside the Bryce Hotel. Cole Drummond stood beside me, one hand braced on the wall as the van rocked. Outside came muffled Savannah sounds, horns, bus brakes, a voice somewhere cutting loose in Spanish. 7:15 in the morning, and I was about to betray my son. The tech agent was young, late 20s, the kind of face that had never really left a lab. He crouched in front of me, holding the pen camera. Left breast pocket, Mr. Calloway, angle it upward. Once it's seated, don't touch it. I nodded. He pressed the pen into the pocket, dialed in the angle, stepped away. On one of the monitors, I caught my own image, a camera already live inside the restaurant. The pen vanished completely, just a ballpoint I might have pocketed any morning for the last 35 years. Audio next, the tech said, extending a plain leather belt. The buckle looked like any other, but the transmitter was sealed inside a microphone so small it disappeared even under direct examination. I stood while he threaded the belt through my loops and cinched it. He pressed a slim device against the inner lining of my jacket and secured it. Panic button left inside pocket. You feel threatened, you hit it. Tactical team breaches in 10 seconds. 10 seconds. Same span it had taken Derek to vanish from Forsyth Park 35 years ago. At 7:30, I tracked the feeds as FBI agents drifted into the Bryce Hotel restaurant one at a time, spaced apart, nothing telegraphing coordination. A couple in their 40s settled near the corner table where I'd be sitting. A woman opened a laptop and ordered at the bar. A man in a suit held the Wall Street Journal up near the window. By 8 a.m., 15 agents were in position. 8 as diners, 4 as waitstaff. 2 behind the bar, 1 floor manager working the room with an earpiece tucked beneath his hair. SWAT's in place. Cole said, eyes on a second screen showing the underground garage. 8 officers in tactical gear were staged there, running weapons checks, adjusting body armor. Too young, I thought. Too young to be waiting in a hotel basement for a 62-year-old PI to hit a button. Russell. Cole's voice hauled me back. He settled onto the bench beside me and dropped his voice beneath the tech agent's. You okay? I wasn't. My hands carried a tremor I couldn't quiet. I'd been sick twice in the field office bathroom before we'd ever loaded into the van, but I gave him the nod anyway. Derek is going to want to see your phone. Cole kept it even. We've been over this, say it back to me. When he asks you, tell him you left it in the car. Walked out this morning without it. Old age. Right. He won't question it. You're 62 running on stress, a forgotten phone is nothing unusual. Cole swept a look at the monitors. He may pat you down. Let him. The belt is just a belt. The pen looks like a pen. Unless he's carrying a frequency scanner, which we know he isn't, he won't find a thing. And if somehow he does, you hit the panic button. This is over in 10 seconds. Cole met my eyes. But he won't. We've run this play 200 times, Russell. Criminals look for high tech. A pen and a belt never crosses their mind. I thought about Derek, the way he'd studied my face up in that penthouse, hunting for any trace of a lie, how sharp he was. How thoroughly he'd been shaped by people who treated killing as a profession. He's not stupid. No, I said, but he's cornered, and cornered people slip up. Cole stood. It's 9 o'clock. Get over there, get yourself settled before he shows. I climbed out of the van at 9:30. The cold landed on me the instant I stepped out. January in Savannah, the wind finding every gap in my coat. I crossed the street, covered the 2 blocks to the Bryce Hotel, and pushed through the revolving doors into the lobby. Marble underfoot, crystal chandeliers overhead, a piano tucked in the corner, with someone coaxing out something soft and easy to forget, the kind of place Diane and I could never have walked into back when we were still a family. I made my way to the restaurant entrance. The host, an FBI agent I recognized, though he looked every bit the part of a hotel employee, offered a polished smile. Good morning, sir. Table for 1, corner table. I said I'm meeting someone. He walked me through the dining room. I kept my eyes off the other guests, even though I knew most of them were agents. Didn't glance at the bartenders or the waitstaff. Just followed him to the corner table and settled into the seat with my back against the wall. Coffee, he asked. Black. He slipped away. A minute later, a server, FBI like everyone else in that room, came back with coffee and a menu. I thanked her, pushed the menu aside, left the coffee sitting there untouched, and drew the pen and a small notepad from my jacket pocket, arranging them on the table as if I meant to take notes. The pen sat there looking harmless. A cheap ballpoint black ink, the kind you grab off a rack at any drugstore. Tucked inside the clip, a camera was quietly capturing everything. I checked my watch. 9:50. 10 minutes. I turned my mind back to the last time I'd faced Derek across a table at his penthouse, when I'd refused to hand over $8 million and he'd looked at me the way you look at an obstacle. When I'd walked out, convinced I'd never lay eyes on him again. I told myself then, I'll bring him down. I'll dig out whatever he's buried, and I'll end it. I hadn't known then that the FBI was already 10 steps ahead, that Derek's wife had turned on him, that in under 2 hours he'd be in handcuffs, and the whole structure he'd built would come apart. I hadn't known I'd be the one standing at the center of it. At 9:58, I spotted him. Derek came through the restaurant entrance, swept the room with a quick glance, and walked straight toward my table. He looked wrecked, suit-creased face, unshaven eyes, red-rimmed like sleep had abandoned him. He carried the coiled energy of a man running on adrenaline and no good options. He dropped into the seat across from me without so much as a hello. I know what you're thinking, he said, voice kept low. But you don't have the full picture. I said nothing. Waited. Derek pulled out his phone and laid it on the table. Check my phone. I want you to see I'm not recording this. He slid it across toward me. I glanced at the screen, locked, but the point was made. Then he looked at me, waiting. Your phone, he said. Where is it? In the car, I said, holding my voice flat. Left it there this morning. Derek's eyes narrowed. You left your phone. I'm 62, Derek. Things slip my mind. He held my gaze for a long beat, then he gestured toward my jacket. You mind, I knew exactly what he meant. He wanted to check me for wires. I rose, held my arms slightly out from my sides. Derek reached across, ran his hands briskly over my jacket, patted the pockets. His fingers passed over the panic button sewn into the lining, took it for a seam, and moved on. He checked my pants pockets. Nothing. He sat back, visibly looser. "Okay," he said. Had to be certain. I settled back into my seat, pulse banging, picked up the pen, clicked it once, made a small mark on the notepad, as if testing it. Derek watched, then tilted his chin toward the pen. "Old habit P. I for 35 years," I said. Wrote everything down. He bought it. I watched the tension drain out of his shoulders, and right then, I knew the snare had closed. Derek believed he was the one holding the reins. Thought he'd made sure no one was listening, that we were truly alone. He had no idea that 15 federal agents were stationed within 10 feet of us, that every syllable was being preserved, that his wife had already walked away, and that in 1 hour his entire operation would be in custody. So Derek leaned forward and said, "Let's talk about the trust fund. Why did you lie to me?" The question came out quieter than I'd meant it to. Derek glanced up from the menu he'd been pretending to study, and something moved across his face for just a moment. Surprise, maybe. Or fear. "I didn't lie about the DNA," he said, choosing his words. "That's real 99.97%. But yeah, I lied about everything else." I eased back against the seat, felt the pen camera shift slightly in my vest pocket. 2 blocks away in a command van, Cole Drummond was hearing every word. 15 FBI agents sat within 20 feet of us, working through their breakfast. "The $8 million, I asked. "The trust fund." Derek's hands had started to shake. He pressed them flat against the table to hold them still. "I owe Arbin Krenicki $25 million. Deadline is today, 5 p.m. If I don't deliver, I'm a dead man." There it was, the first real admission. I kept myself steady, kept my voice level even as my heart knocked hard against my chest. "How did you end up $25 million under?" Derek let out a laugh, but there wasn't a shred of humor in it. "I've been washing money for them since 2016. Over 300 million. I skimmed about 3.5%, nearly 11 million over 5 years." He paused, stared at his hands. I gambled it away. Atlantic City online poker started out small in 2019. By last summer, I'd burned through every dollar I'd made and started dipping into funds I was supposed to be holding for Krenicki. When he found out, he gave me until today. Pay it all back or face the consequences. I thought about the FBI's raid schedule. In less than an hour, Arbin Krenicki would be in handcuffs at a warehouse at the port of Savannah. But Derek had no idea. As far as he knew, he had 5 hours left to live. "So you came looking for me," I said, "to take the trust fund." "Yes." Derek met my eyes, and what I saw there was something close to defiance. "I ran the DNA test in 2019. Learned you were my father. Started digging. Found the kidnapping case. Found your father's obituary. Found the probate filing showing the trust fund, $140 million. And you sat on it for 2 years. I held off until the moment was right. You turned 65 in 2025, 3 years out. Near enough to build urgency, far enough that the deadline wouldn't make you suspicious." He drew the NJSA document from his canvas shoulder bag, the same 52-page accordion folder, the kind lawyers use that Burton Ashford had shown me weeks before. I was going to use this to transfer $70 million to myself right away, then bleed out the rest through the power of attorney clause, buried on page 47. You'd have signed it, and by the time you understood what you'd handed over, the money would have been long gone. "And the story about being trafficked?" I asked. "About suffering for 15 years, about wanting to reconnect with your father." Derek was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to barely a whisper. Some of it was true. I was taken. I was sold. I did spend time in an orphanage in Bucharest, but the part about wanting family, about missing you, he stopped. I wanted it to be true. I really did. But it wasn't. No. I thought about Diane. About the 6 years she'd given over to searching for this man, holding on to the belief that he was out there somewhere waiting. About how that hope had slowly consumed her. "Did you ever care at all that I'm your father?" I asked. Derek's composure came apart. His eyes went wet. And when the words came, his voice was unsteady. "When I first found out, when that DNA result came back and I saw your name, I wanted to feel something. But Russell, I was 3 years old when they took me. I don't remember you. I don't remember Mom. I don't remember the house on Habersham Street or the dog or any of it. The only thing I remember is waking up in a van, being passed off to strangers, being told I was merchandise." A tear tracked down his cheek. He scrubbed it away. "I spent 17 years with no idea who I was. And when I finally knew, when I finally had a name and a history and a place I'd come from, I was already buried so deep inside Kroniki's world that there was no road out. The trust fund was supposed to be my exit, my chance to clear the debt and vanish. Start clean, but you weren't going to share any of it with me," I said. "You were going to take it all." "Yes." I looked at him, this man who carried my DNA and Diane's eyes, but was a stranger in every way that counted. And I felt something give way inside me. "Ah, your mother died because of you," I said. The words hit harder than I'd meant them to, but I left them where they landed. "She gave 6 years of her life to finding you, never stopped, never wavered, and in the end, the grief swallowed her whole." Pills. August 1992. "I found her in our bedroom, holding the photograph from your 3rd birthday." Derek closed his eyes. "I know. I came across the obituary while I was doing my research. I'm sorry. Are you, I don't know." He opened his eyes and held mine. "I'm sorry she's gone. I'm sorry for what you lost, but I can't carry guilt for something I had no hand in. I was 3 years old, Russell. Being kidnapped wasn't something I chose. None of this was. No," I said quietly, "but you chose to deceive me. You chose to try to rob me. You chose to turn my grief into a tool." Derek didn't argue the point. "What happens now?" I asked, though I already knew where this was going. "I need you to wire $25 million by 3 p.m. There's no other way." He leaned in, frantic. "Please, Russell, I know I lied. I know I haven't earned your help, but if you don't, if Kroniki doesn't get paid by 5 p.m., I'm dead. And I don't mean arrested. I mean in the ground." I looked at him, at the fear written all over his face, at the tremor in his hands, and I said the only thing left to say. "I can't do that." Derek sat back, the last flicker of hope going out behind his eyes. "Then I'm dead," he said. Flat. Final. Before I could say anything, movement caught the edge of my vision. Cole Drummond, walking toward our table with 6 agents at his back, every one of them with a hand drifting toward a holster. Derek saw it too. He started to rise, and then Cole was on him, one hand settling firm on Derek's shoulder, voice even and professional. "Derek Harlow, you're under arrest for money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit racketeering." Derek went completely still. Then slowly he turned to look at me. "You," he said, voice stripped of everything, "you set me up." I couldn't find words, couldn't move, just sat there with the pen camera still running in my pocket as Cole drew Derek's hands behind his back and snapped the cuffs on. "I'm sorry I finally got out." Derek said nothing. Just let the agents bring him up from the table, read him his Miranda rights, and walk him out through the restaurant. and I sat there alone at a corner table surrounded by federal agents pretending to be strangers, and asked myself whether saving my son from something worse had been worth what it had just cost between us. I didn't have an answer. I sat in the back of the command van watching 6 surveillance monitors as Derek was brought out of the Bryce Hotel in handcuffs. On screen 3, 2 agents guided him toward a black SUV idling at the curb. He moved like a man walking through deep water, and just before they put him inside, he turned and looked back at the hotel. I don't know what he was looking for. Maybe me. Maybe one last look at the life he'd tried to construct on a foundation of lies. But from where I sat 2 blocks away, all I could see was a stranger being loaded into a car. Cole Drummond stood beside me, one hand braced against the van wall. 1,100 hours, he said into his radio. All units execute. Across the screens, 3 locations burst into motion at once. Port of Savannah. Screen 1 showed the warehouse from 2 angles: front entrance and rear loading dock. A 12-person tactical team advanced in coordinated silence, body armor dark against the pale morning. They moved with the kind of precision that only comes from doing something 100 times over. At exactly 11 a.m., they went in. The front door gave way under a battering ram. Flashbangs went off inside, brief white flares on the grainy footage. Through the chaos, I could make out figures moving. Arbin Kranicki at the center of the warehouse, 6 men around him, all of them reaching for weapons they wouldn't get to. FBI on the floor now. Arbin lunged for something, a gun in a shoulder holster maybe, but an agent brought him down before his hand reached it. 2 of his men tried to fight back. I watched one take a taser and drop like dead weight. It took 3 agents to pin the other, all of them going across the concrete in a heap of struggling limbs and shouted commands. By 11:08, it was over. 7 men face down, zip-tied duffel bags lined up against the wall. Agents moving through, photographing stacks of cash. 12 million, Cole said, watching the same feed. Plus ledgers, phones, 4 weapons. Clean sweep. I didn't say anything. On the screen, Arbin Kranicki turned his head, and the camera caught his face for just a second. Pure rage. The kind that doesn't soften behind bars. The kind that sits and waits for decades. I thought about Angelo Battaglia moldering in a cell for 25 years, feeding a vendetta that had torn my family apart. And I wondered whether Arbin Kranicki would do the same. Whether 30 years from now, some other Calloway would be sitting in an FBI van watching the whole thing play out again. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Screen 2 showed Terminal 4 Gate B-22. 3 men in dark coats near the boarding area, each holding a duffel bag. They could have been any other travelers, worn down, distracted, scrolling their phones. At 1100 hours, 8 FBI agents converged from 3 directions. No drawn weapons, no shouting, just a quiet ring closing around 3 men who had no exit. The first courier, Luan Hoka, according to the file Cole had shown me earlier, set his bag down, slowly, hands in plain sight. The second, Gent Maru, tried to step back and had 2 agents on him, instantly, arms locked behind him before he could manage 3 paces. The third youngest of the group, Besnik, just stood there, with his hands already raised like he'd seen this coming all along. TSA cleared the surrounding area. Passengers were redirected to another gate, and within 4 minutes, all 3 were in custody. Their duffel bags spread open on a table, bricks of $100 bills, visible even on the washed-out security footage. 8 million, Cole said, split 3 ways to stay under the reporting threshold. Structuring charge alone gets them 10 years. I nodded, but couldn't speak. The weight of the past 48 hours was pressing down on me, and all I could manage was to sit there and watch other people's lives fall apart on a set of monitors. Derek's penthouse. Screen 3 showed Cassie Harlow letting herself into the Charlotte apartment and stepping aside as 4 FBI agents went in. I'd only seen her once, briefly in the background at Derek's place, but on the monitor she looked different, steadier, resolved. She crossed to the bedroom, opened a safe I hadn't known was there, and began passing items to the lead agent. Laptop USB drives, cash in stacks, documents in accordion folders, 2 passports carrying Derek's face under different names. The agent logged everything, had Cassie sign the evidence sheet, then walked her out. The whole thing took 15 minutes. No scene, no hesitation, just a woman methodically handing over the remains of her husband's hidden life and stepping into witness protection. She'll testify, Cole said. Trial's probably a year out, but between her cooperation and the wire recording, we've got it locked. Yeah, I said quietly. Russell, I know. I didn't look at him. Couldn't pull my eyes off the screens. It's over. We won. Justice served. Cole went quiet a moment. Then, it doesn't feel like winning, does it? No. By noon, all 4 operations were wrapped. 11 people in federal custody, $20 million in cash, seized evidence that would take months to work through, but was already enough to dismantle the largest Albanian organized crime operation on the East Coast. I should have felt something. Relief, maybe. Pride. The knowledge that I'd done what needed doing. Instead, I felt hollowed out. There's one more thing, Cole said, drawing out a folder. The trust fund. The FBI is freezing it for 4 months while a full audit runs. I looked up. Why standard procedure in organized crime cases? We need to confirm that your father's money is clean. No mob entanglements, no laundering, nothing that clouds the inheritance. Could run until June, maybe July. But Russell, he held my gaze. We've already done preliminary checks. Clifford's money came from above-board sources. Shipping investments, real estate, his own accumulated savings. It's clean. Okay. That's $140 million, Cole said, as if I hadn't grasped it. Once the audit clears, it's yours. I don't want it. Cole frowned. What, I don't want the money? I got to my feet, felt the van shift slightly under me. My father kept it from me because he figured I'd turn it down. He was right. Derek is behind bars because of what I did. My wife is gone, and my voice gave out. 62 years old, and I just burned down my own son to pull him back from the edge. What does a man do with $140 million when that's what it cost him? Cole had no answer for that. It's done, he said. Finally over. You made the right call. I turned it over in my mind. Derek glancing back at the hotel entrance as the agents put him in that vehicle. Diane with that photograph on the night she took the pills. 35 years of not knowing, then 6 days of being played, then 45 minutes at a corner table that closed the book on all of it. So why, I said, does it feel like losing him twice? Cole let the question sit. Some things don't have answers. The courts took over with the grinding efficiency I'd watched from the outside for 35 years as a P. Only this time I was in the middle of it. On February 6, 2022, Derek Harlow stood before the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania for his formal arraignment. 3 full pages of charges: conspiracy to commit money laundering, 18 counts of wire fraud, racketeering conspiracy under 18 U.S.C. Section 1959D, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. The prosecution's evidence summary topped out at 412 pages, and a copy arrived in my mailbox by certified mail. Every page of it. I sat with it until I'd read every last line. Count 1 laid out how the defendant, between January 2016 and January 2022, knowingly moved approximately $300 million in criminal proceeds through 47 offshore accounts spread across Cyprus, Malta, and Albania. Count 2 described a scheme to defraud Russell Calloway through fabricated identity claims, manipulated DNA evidence, and the exploitation of a family trust fund worth $140 million. I stayed away from the arraignment, couldn't put myself in that courtroom, and watched Derek led in wearing shackles. Cole phoned from the steps outside and told me Derek had entered a not guilty plea. Calm, professional, like he was reading from a script. Cole added, "Standard procedure, Russell. The real negotiation comes later." I put the phone down and sat staring at it for 20 minutes, turning over the distance between a 3-year-old boy snatched from Forsyth Park and a 38-year-old man now looking at the rest of his life in federal custody. By the middle of March, Derek's life outside those walls had started coming apart piece by piece predictably, and yet each piece still landed hard. Cassie Harlow filed for divorce on March 12th. The petition cited irreconcilable differences and criminal conduct by respondent. Cole mentioned over coffee that she'd been quietly moved to a new city through the federal witness security program. Derek raised no objection to the divorce, and his attorney, a public defender named Dario Fuentes, informed the court that his client was waiving any right to a hearing. I found myself wondering whether Derek felt a thing when he signed those papers, or whether the numbness had already taken hold the way it had swallowed me whole after Diane died. The way it had me now, watching my son's life dismantle itself from a safe distance, while I sat surrounded by 35 years of case files that no longer meant a damn thing. April brought the plea offer. Cole forwarded me a redacted copy along with a 2-word email thought you should know. Assistant U.S. Attorney Vanessa Khoury had put together a deal under which Derek could plead guilty to conspiracy to commit money laundering 1 count and wire fraud 5 counts in exchange for the government dropping the RICO charge and recommending a 35-year federal sentence with parole eligibility after 25 years. 35 years put Derek at 73 on the day he'd walk out exactly where I'd be in 11 years. That arithmetic felt like it was designed to hurt. At the bottom of Vanessa's cover letter, 1 line in her own hand. "This is the best offer he'll get. RICO exposure would be life." I called Cole the moment I read it and pressed him on why they'd let the RICO charge go. He explained that Cassie's cooperation had unlocked Arben Krniki and the entire Albanian network for them, and had made it clear that Derek's function had been that of a money launderer, not a commander. Technically, he was a tool, Cole said, his voice deliberate. A costly one, a deeply culpable one, but Krniki was the one who drew the blueprints. That sent me back to Angelo Battaglia and his 40-year obsession, a vendetta he'd nursed through a quarter-century behind bars until it consumed everything around him. I wondered if Derek had ever had a genuine choice, or whether his fate was sealed the instant those men pushed him into the back of that black Mercedes in 1986. Derek took the deal on May 9th. Eddie went to the hearing in my place because I couldn't make myself walk through those doors. He sent me a photo Derek in orange wrists, cuffed chin dropped toward his chest, and I deleted it before I'd even fully looked at it. I wasn't adding that picture to the collection already living in my head. The days after that blurred together, one rolling into the next, without distinction, until Cole reached me on June 4th, carrying word I'd more or less stopped anticipating. The trust fund's been released. I was at my desk sorting through old files when it registered. The forensic audit had come back clean. Clifford Kensington's fortune was entirely legitimate, built from a shipping logistics company he'd launched in 1975, untouched by organized crime, by laundering, by anything that could taint the inheritance. The $140 million belonged to me legally and completely. I set the phone down and went to stand at the window, looking out across the Savannah skyline, while somewhere across town in a federal holding cell, Derek waited to hear his sentence. The money meant nothing to me. My son was what I wanted back. A letter turned up on June 18th, postmarked from the Federal Detention Center in Savannah. Inmate number 08742-048. The script was careful, deliberate. It brought to mind the adoption documents Derek had spread across the table in front of me back in January. It opened with a single word: Dad. That word hit me somewhere deep, harder than anything over the preceding 6 months. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I understand what I did to you, to Mom's memory, to the man who gave 35 years of his life trying to reach me and got repaid with theft. I've spent a lot of hours inside my own head going over the kidnapping, over the decisions I made, over the fact that I had a father who searched 3 decades to find me, and what I gave him in return was a scheme to take everything he had left. There's no reversing it. But I need you to know I've thought about what a different life might have looked like, what it would have meant to actually be your son. Signed, simply Derek. I read it through 4 times before I reached for the phone and dialed the detention center to put my name on the visitor list. When the intake clerk asked how I was connected to the inmate, I only hesitated a breath before answering: Father. On Monday morning, June 15th, 2022, I was in the 3rd row of the federal courtroom by 8:55, watching a bailiff move papers around on the bench, while my grip tightened on the edge of the wooden pew in front of me, hard enough to whiten my knuckles. Cole was next to me, not saying anything, and when I looked over at him, the nod he returned said everything: you don't have to put yourself through this. We both knew that was wrong. At 9 o'clock, exactly, the side door came open, and 2 U.S. Marshals brought Derek in orange jumpsuit leg shackles that clinked against the floor with every small step, and something in my chest cracked apart when I registered how much of him had hollowed out over the 5 months since the arrest. He settled in at the defense table beside Dario Fuentes, hands secured in front of him, back to the gallery. He never turned around. He didn't need to. I could feel that he knew I was there. Judge Harriet Vander came in, and the room stood. When she told us to sit, the silence that settled over that courtroom had a particular weight to it, the kind that collects before something that can't be undone. Vanessa Coury pushed back from the prosecution table, carried a folder to the bench, the one that held the accounting of every move Derek had made, and addressed the court without any tremor in her voice. Your Honor, Derek Harlow laundered $312 million on behalf of the Krenicki criminal organization between January 2016 and January 2022, facilitating narcotics trafficking, human smuggling, and racketeering across 4 continents. He built a network of 47 offshore shell companies to obscure the trail of those illicit funds. When his personal debt to the organization climbed to $25 million, he moved to defraud his own biological father, Russell Calloway, targeting a family trust fund worth $140 million. She stopped and turned to look at Derek before finishing. The defendant weaponized the story of his own childhood abduction, using it to work his victim's grief and buy his trust. Judge Vander addressed Derek directly and asked whether he had anything to say before she imposed sentence. Derek got to his feet, Dario Fuentes steadying him with a hand at his elbow. He kept his voice low, but it didn't waver. Your Honor, I was 3 years old when I was taken from my father. The 15 years that followed aren't something I'd put into words in front of anyone, and in 1997 I was adopted and came to this country. I'm not raising any of that as a defense. The decisions I made as a grown man were mine alone. I understood exactly what I was doing inside Arben Krenicki's organization, and I understood what I was doing when I set out to take from my own father. He stopped, drew a breath that trembled even at that distance. I made terrible choices. I hurt people who didn't deserve it. I'm sorry. Then Derek turned his head slightly toward the gallery, and across the room his eyes found mine. And in his face I saw both the 3-year-old boy from Forsyth Park and the 38-year-old man who'd moved $300 million in dirty money. Somehow they were the same person, and I had no idea how to hold that. Judge Vander reviewed the plea agreement, confirmed that Derek understood he was surrendering his right to appeal, and then delivered the sentence with the detached precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Derek Harlow, you are hereby sentenced to 35 years in federal prison with eligibility for parole after 25 years pursuant to the terms of your plea agreement with the United States Attorney's Office. You will receive credit for 4 months' time served from January 22nd, 2022 to today's date. You will be remanded immediately to the custody of the U.S. Bureau of Prisons. The gavel came down. The marshal stepped up and took Derek by the arms. In the instant before they turned him toward the door, he looked back at me and shaped 2 words with his mouth. I'm sorry. My eyes blurred, and I gave him one small nod, barely more than a dip of my chin, and then he was gone. Cole and I stood outside the courthouse 10 minutes after in the June heat, and I watched strangers moving along the street going about the business of ordinary lives, while mine had just broken into everything that came before and everything that would come after. Russell Cole said carefully, and I turned toward him. The words were out before I'd fully thought them through. I want to visit him once a month. Cole held my gaze for a long beat, then nodded, and I understood that somewhere across the past 5 months I'd stopped seeing Derek as the man who'd tried to rob me, and started seeing him as my son, the one I'd lost 36 years ago, and somehow located again, even if there was no version of this that could be called saved. I stood outside the new office on Bull Street in mid-November 2022, looking through the glass doors at the Diane Calloway Foundation logo stenciled in gold letters, and beyond it, the view of Forsyth Park, the place where I'd lost my son 36 years before. The foundation had taken 2 months to set up as a 501c3 nonprofit, and I'd put $135 million from Clifford Kensington's trust fund into it, holding back $5 million in reserve for reasons I wasn't quite ready to examine. The mission was straightforward: find missing children and support survivors of human trafficking. We'd brought on 8 investigators, all former FBI, along with 3 social workers and 2 case managers. The doors opened on November 18th, with enough cases already waiting to occupy us for decades. I named it after Diane because losing Derek had taken her from me just as surely as any illness, and if I couldn't give our son back to her, I could at least try to spare other families the same kind of wound. By December, I'd been in every day for 3 weeks, running, going over cases, working with staff, until Cole called and asked whether I'd scheduled that prison visit yet. I hadn't. The honest answer was that I wasn't sure I could walk into a room and face Derek after watching a judge give him 35 years. Every time I thought about making the drive to FCI Jessup, something else found a way to get in front of it. But on Saturday morning, December 20th, I pulled out of my driveway at 9 o'clock and drove 90 minutes through the Georgia countryside to the Federal Correctional Institution, where my son was beginning what would likely be 25 Christmases inside. The visiting room was painted institutional beige and carried that particular smell, disinfectant, and something underneath it that I couldn't name, split down the center by bulletproof glass with metal stools bolted to the floor on each side. I took my seat at 2 p.m. and waited. When the door opened and Derek came in wearing a khaki prison uniform, I almost didn't know him. He'd shed maybe 20 pounds since June, his face drawn and hollowed in the way of someone who wasn't getting much sleep. He settled onto the stool across the glass and lifted the telephone receiver on his side, and I picked up mine. "You didn't have to come." Derek said, his voice somehow smaller than I remembered it. "I know." He studied his hands for a moment, then lifted his eyes back to mine. I heard about the foundation. Mom would have been proud. I named it after her. Losing you killed her, Derek. I'm sorry for everything. His eyes were red at the edges, and I wondered whether he'd been crying before they brought him out. I know you are. Do you? He paused and worked to swallow. Do you hate me? I'd been asking myself that question since January, and I still couldn't get to a clean answer. No, I said at last. I'm angry. I'm hurt. But I don't hate you. Derek's face gave way and tears started tracking down his face, and he pressed his open palm flat against the glass, reaching towards something that wasn't there to reach. I don't deserve that. Maybe not, but you're still my son. We stayed like that in silence for a long stretch. Derek crying without any sound, me watching him turning over every version of the person I'd lost and found and lost again. At 3 p.m., a guard put a hand on Derek's shoulder and told him time was up. He rose slowly and looked at me through the glass. Will you come back? I thought about the foundation, about the $5 million I'd set aside in a separate trust account bearing Derek's name money. He wouldn't know existed until parole made it relevant money that would be sitting there in 25 years if he wanted to build something from scratch. I thought about Diane and the 35 years I'd given over to finding our son, and about the particular cruelty of having finally found him like this. I don't know, I said. But maybe. I walked back out into the open air and got in the car and drove back toward Savannah through the gray of a winter afternoon. By the time the city came into view, something had settled in me. I had lost Derek twice, first to the men who took him in 1986, and then to the person their world had made him. But maybe if there was enough time and enough effort, I could be there when he found his way back to something different. 25 years was a long road. No guarantees attached. But I'd already logged 36 years looking for him. Another quarter century, if it gave my son a real shot at the life that had been stripped from both of us, wasn't too much to ask. If you've stayed with me this far, then you already know this wasn't a simple story. It was the kind that leaves marks. I spent 35 years searching for a son I thought the world had swallowed whole. When I finally found him, I had to turn around and be the one to put him in handcuffs. There's no clean way to carry that. I believe God allowed Derek back into my life not to destroy me, but to show me that even the worst outcome can be turned towards something good. The Diane Calloway Foundation is proof of that. Grief, when it's given a purpose, stops being only grief. This is what I'd want you to take from this story. First, love is not the same as trust. You can love someone completely and still demand honesty from them. Never confuse the two. Second, when something feels urgent in a way that shuts down your questions, slow down. Urgency is how con artists, even family ones, keep you from thinking clearly. Third, if you discover someone has deceived you, gather your evidence quietly before you move. Emotion is a weapon they'll use against you. Fourth, forgiveness is something you carry for yourself, not a verdict on whether the other person deserves it. This is the kind of family revenge story that doesn't end with a bow on it. It ends with a man driving home through a winter afternoon, deciding what to do with the time he has left. These grandpa stories, stories of fathers and sons of loss and hard choices across generations, they stay with us because they're about all of us. If this story reached something in, you leave a comment and tell me what you're thinking. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to Calm Family Revenge. There are more stories like this one waiting for you. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.